My name is Serafina Griffin. At 34 years old, I spent my days charting supply chain efficiencies in a windowless corporate office and my nights tracking every dollar I spent. I lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment for 10 years, saving $140,000 so I could buy a piece of my own future. When I finally placed the thick folded deed to an abandoned commercial property on my parents' mahogany dining table, my older brother Harrison laughed so hard he spilled his scotch. He leaned back in his chair, tapped the crystal face of his $12,000 watch, and announced to the room that I was a hopeless failure. He told me I had thrown my life away on a toxic dirt patch. My mother Caroline did not defend me. She simply stirred her iced tea and dismissed my decade of sacrifice as just another tragic charity case. They looked right through me, just like they always did. But what they did not know was that just a week later, I would take a heavy angle grinder to a rusted steel door on that property. They had no idea what was sleeping in the dark behind the convenience store, or that the overgrown dirt patch they found so amusing actually held the legal key to Harrison's entire career. The trap they blindly walked into and the monopoly I built out of their mockery is something none of them saw coming. Welcome back to Luke Vengeance, where quiet people finally get the last word. If stories about family betrayal and earned justice keep you listening, drop a comment telling me your age and where you are tuning in from, and be sure to subscribe. Now, let me take you back to the night the battle lines were drawn. The air conditioning in my parents' Richmond home hummed a low, steady rhythm against the heavy Virginia humidity. The dining room smelled of roasted garlic and lemon furniture polish. My mother stood at the head of the long table, carving a roast. She placed the thick, tender center cut on Harrison's plate. She handed me the dry end piece without making eye contact. That was the geography of our family. Harrison was the center, I was the edge. Harrison was a vice president of acquisitions for a commercial developer. He got his first interview because my father played golf with the chief executive. He secured his promotions because he knew how to wear a custom suit and nod at the right investors. I was just a logistics analyst. My family viewed my career as a placeholder, a temporary hobby until I figured out how to be more like my brother. I pulled the property deed from my purse and set it next to my water glass. The thick parchment paper felt heavy and real against the polished wood of the table. I bought a commercial property today, I said. My voice was measured and calm. A foolish part of me still wanted them to be proud. Caroline paused with the gravy boat hovering over the table. Harrison stopped chewing. He picked up the document and let his eyes scan the address. A slow, mocking grin stretched across his face. Highway 11, Harrison said. His tone dripped with fake pity. You bought that condemned Gulf station, the one with the collapsed canopy and the weeds growing through the pumps. I bought a 1/4 acre of commercial zoning on an expanding transit corridor, I corrected him. The soil remediation is already cleared. The underground tanks were removed decades ago. Harrison tossed the deed back onto the table like it was a dirty napkin. You threw your life savings into a toxic dirt patch, Sarah. It is worthless. You are a hopeless failure at business, and you are going to go bankrupt trying to fix a rusted piece of junk. I looked at my mother, expecting a gentle intervention. Caroline sighed and picked up her crystal glass. The ice clinked, a sharp, cold sound that echoed in the quiet room. It is just your latest charity case, Serafina, she said. Why must you always make things so difficult for yourself? You should just sell it at a loss and ask your brother for an administrative job. I do not want a job, I said, keeping my hands flat on the wood. I want my own business. Harrison crossed his arms and offered a tight, predatory smile. Tell you what, when you run out of money next month, call me. I will give you a personal loan to bail you out, but I am keeping the title as collateral. He was not joking. He was marking his territory, establishing his dominance over the only thing I owned. I did not yell. I did not cry. I picked up my deed, slid it back into my purse, and stood up from the table. I left my dinner untouched. I walked out the front door, letting the heavy, humid air hit my face. I knew right then I was entirely on my own. 2 days later, I stood in the tall weeds behind the convenience store. The summer heat was suffocating. Cicadas buzzed a relentless warning in the tree line. I had spent the entire morning clearing raccoon nests and pulling dry rot out of the front office. My hands were blistered and my shoulders ached. But the back of the brick building held something the real estate agent had glossed over during the walkthrough. Hidden behind a thick wall of overgrown ivy was a heavy steel door. The agent claimed it was a collapsed boiler room. He told me to ignore it until I hired a professional demolition crew. But my brain was trained to find anomalies in supply chains and blueprints. I traced the exterior foundation line in the dirt. The dimensions did not match a standard boiler room. I drove my truck to a local hardware store and rented a heavy-duty angle grinder. By 2 p.m, the sun was beating down on the back of my neck. I put on a pair of scratched safety goggles, plugged the grinder into my portable generator, and pressed the abrasive disc against the hardened steel of the padlock. Orange sparks cascaded onto the crushed gravel, illuminating the shadows in brief, jagged flashes. The screech of metal on metal drowned out the distant highway traffic. Sweat pooled at my collarbone and stung the fresh scratches on my arms. I leaned my weight into the tool, letting it bite deeper into a lock that had not seen a key since the 1970s. The steel shackle finally snapped. The heavy lock dropped into the weeds with a dull thud. I killed the power. The sudden silence ringing in my ears felt thicker than the noise. Setting the tool on an overturned milk crate, I grabbed my heavy flashlight. I wrapped both hands around the iron handle of the door, braced my boots in the dirt, and pulled. The hinges screamed in protest. A rush of trapped, stale air exhaled from the darkness. It carried the distinct, sweet scent of ancient motor oil and dry concrete. I swept the beam of light inside. It was not a boiler room. The walls were reinforced cinder block, climate-sealed, and bone-dry. No rusted pipes, no water damage. Sitting in the center of the floor was a low, wide silhouette, draped in a thick canvas tarp. In the far corner stood a dented metal filing cabinet, its drawers secured with a secondary locking bar. My pulse tapped a quick rhythm against my throat. I stepped over the threshold, my boots crunching on decades of undisturbed dust. I reached for the dusty edge of the canvas. My mind raced through the property disclosures I had memorized over the last 6 months. None of this was on the schematic. And what I found waiting under that fabric was about to change the entire trajectory of my life. The heavy canvas tarp felt stiff and rough under my blistered palms. I gripped the frayed edge and pulled backward. The fabric slid off the low silhouette with a dry scraping sound, sending a cloud of ancient gray dust swirling into the beam of my flashlight. I stopped breathing. Sitting in the center of the cinder block vault was a 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1. The classic muscle car was painted a deep gloss black, though a thick layer of grime muted its shine. The chrome bumpers caught the light, throwing fractured reflections against the concrete walls. The tires had gone flat decades ago, settling the heavy chassis close to the floor. But the body was pristine. No rust spots, no dents along the quarter panels. It was a perfect matching numbers survivor, locked away and forgotten. I ran a trembling hand along the sleek curve of the front fender. The metal was ice cold beneath the dust. My mind struggled to process the reality of what I was looking at. A vehicle like this, in unrestored original condition, was worth more than I had earned in my first 3 years working as a logistics analyst. Standing there in the stifling heat of the vault, the harsh reality of my financial situation crashed into me all over again. I thought about the $140,000 I had drained from my bank account to buy this overgrown property. That money represented 10 years of my life, 10 years of waking up at dawn, working late shifts, and living in a cramped fourth-floor apartment where the radiator clanked all winter and the air conditioning barely worked all summer. I had skipped vacations. I had worn coats until the elbows frayed. I had tracked every single grocery receipt on a spreadsheet just to buy my independence. And 2 weeks ago at that mahogany dining table, my brother Harrison had dismissed a decade of my blood and sweat as a pathetic joke. I could still hear the smug, steady rhythm of his voice echoing in my head. I could still see the way the dining room chandelier caught the crystal face of his $12,000 Rolex when he tapped his wrist, lecturing me about the value of $1. Harrison did not know the value of $1. He only knew the value of our father's country club connections. He had walked straight out of an expensive university into a corner office because our father made a phone call to a corporate executive. Harrison never had to save. He never had to calculate the risk of a single misstep. If he failed, our parents would quietly write a check to catch his fall and erase the evidence. If I failed, I had nothing. There was no safety net waiting to catch me. If this gas station did not turn a profit, I would lose my home, my savings, and my future. I would have to endure the ultimate humiliation of asking Harrison for that administrative job he offered. The thought of sitting in his glass-walled corporate office, fetching his coffee, and listening to him brag made my stomach turn sour. I refused to be a spectator in my own life. I wiped a streak of dust from my forehead and turned my flashlight away from the Mustang. A car was just a machine. As a logistics analyst, I knew a physical asset meant nothing without the legal paperwork to prove ownership. I walked over to the dented metal filing cabinet standing in the far corner of the vault. The top drawer was secured by a rusted steel locking bar. I grabbed a heavy brass plumb bob sitting on a nearby wooden workbench and brought it down hard against the rusted locking mechanism. The brittle metal gave way with a sharp crack echoing loudly in the enclosed space. I pulled the top drawer open. The metal tracks screeched in protest. Inside the drawer smelled of mildew and rotting paper. Most of the files had succumbed to trapped moisture, turning into a solid block of decay. But resting at the very back of the drawer, protected from the elements, was a heavy, gray, fireproof lockbox. I hauled the box out and set it on the dusty hood of the Mustang. The lock was a simple key mechanism, but the internal components were degraded. I wedged the tip of a flathead screwdriver into the keyhole and struck the handle with the brass plumb bob. The internal tumblers shattered and gave way. I flipped the lid open. Inside, resting on a bed of dry silica packets, was a pristine manila envelope. My fingers shook slightly as I opened the flap. I slid the contents out into the beam of my flashlight. The first document was a thick piece of cardstock. It was the original vehicle title for the Mustang. I scanned the lines of typed text. The ownership section was signed in blue ink by the previous owner, but the buyer line was left entirely blank. The title was undated and unassigned. It was a bearer instrument. Whoever possessed this specific piece of paper owned the vehicle outright. A rush of adrenaline hit my chest. I had just found the financial lifeline I desperately needed. But the title was not the only document inside the envelope. Resting beneath the vehicle title was a yellowed trifold document printed on heavy legal paper. The edges were brittle, flaking away as I carefully unfolded it. The header at the top read, Deed of Easement and Restrictive Covenant. The date stamped in the top right corner was October 14th, 1970. I leaned closer, bringing the flashlight beam directly over the faded typewriter ink. My eyes darted across the dense legal jargon. Words like perpetual right-of-way, unsevered utility access, and exclusive subterranean routing jumped off the page. I traced the property boundary coordinates with my index finger. The numbers matched the exact dimensions of my quarter-acre lot. But the covenant detailed something the modern real estate agent had entirely missed during the sale. According to this 50-year-old document, the original owner of the gas station had secured the exclusive water, sewer, and utility routing rights for the entire 300-acre valley situated directly behind my property. I read the paragraph 3 times to make sure my eyes were not deceiving me. The legal language was ironclad. Any future commercial or residential development on the 300 acres behind the gas station required underground utilities to pass directly through my specific parcel of land. The modern county property records showed none of this. I realized instantly what must have happened. In the 1970s, property records were transferred and logged by hand. A tired county clerk had misfiled this easement under a misspelled parcel identification number. The digital algorithms used by modern title companies would never flag a misspelled manual entry from 5 decades ago. But the original hard copy sitting right in front of me was legally binding and enforceable. I stared at the brittle paper. The silence of the cinder block vault felt different now. It did not feel abandoned or forgotten. It felt like a loaded weapon resting in the palm of my hand. I did not just own a rundown convenience store on a highway. I owned a legal choke point. I held the sole gateway to 300 acres of prime, undeveloped Virginia real estate. Whoever wanted to build behind me had to go through me. They had to get my permission, and they had to pay my price. I carefully folded the documents and placed them back into the fireproof box. I tucked the box securely under my arm. I stepped out of the vault, back into the suffocating summer night, and pulled the heavy steel door shut behind me. The cicadas were still humming in the dark tree line. The vast expanse of the valley stretched out beyond the overgrown weeds of my lot. I stood at the edge of the gravel, looking out at the empty acreage. A cold, sharp question formed in my mind. If I controlled the access rights to the valley, who owned the actual land behind me? I locked the new padlock on the front office door and climbed into the driver's seat of my truck. I needed to open my laptop. I needed to access the county tax database immediately, because whoever was holding those 300 acres was about to get a very expensive surprise. And I was about to discover just how dangerous this game was going to get. The back office of the gas station smelled of dry rot and stale cigarette smoke. I dragged a rusted folding chair over to a discarded wooden spool, using it as a makeshift desk. The screen of my laptop cast a pale blue glow against the peeling wallpaper. My battery icon showed 40%. I had to work fast. I connected to a mobile hotspot and navigated to the state property tax portal. My fingers moved across the keyboard with automatic precision. For 10 years, my career revolved around locating hidden anomalies in global supply chains. I tracked missing cargo containers across oceans by hunting for discrepancies in customs manifests. Finding the true owner of a rural Virginia land parcel was child's play compared to untangling international freight routes. I typed in the coordinates listed on the brittle 1970 deed. The county mapping system loaded a pixelated aerial view of the valley. A bright red boundary line highlighted the 300 acres directly behind my lot. The registered owner was listed as an entity called Shenandoah Vista Partners Limited Liability Company. That told me nothing. Corporate entities were designed to build walls between real assets and their true owners. I opened a new tab and accessed the State Corporate Commission database. I pulled the registration filings for Shenandoah Vista Partners. The registered agent was a generic corporate services firm in Richmond. I dug deeper, downloading the annual shareholder report. I scrolled past the boilerplate legal disclaimers until I reached the signature line of the managing director. My breath caught in my throat. The signature belonged to an executive named Richard Vance. Richard Vance was the chief executive officer of the commercial development firm where my brother Harrison worked as a vice president. I leaned back in the folding chair. The rusted metal creaked under my weight. The pieces of the puzzle began sliding into place with cold, terrifying precision. I opened a search engine and typed Richard Vance Shenandoah Valley Project. The results flooded my screen. The first link was a press release from a local business journal dated 3 months ago. I clicked the article. A glossy digital rendering filled the display. It showed a sprawling luxury retail and residential utopia nestled right in the valley behind my gas station. The artist had drawn tree-lined boulevards, boutique storefronts, and expansive glass condominiums. The text boasted a $400 million investment poised to revitalize the entire county economy. I zoomed in on the rendering, focusing on the entrance to the development. The architects had painted a wide, beautiful access road connecting the new luxury enclave directly to Highway 11. I looked at the coordinates of that painted road. It ran straight over the exact spot where I was currently sitting. Harrison did not just mock my purchase because he enjoyed being cruel. He mocked me because his firm needed this specific piece of earth. They needed my lot to lay their sewer lines, to run their municipal water, and to pave their grand entrance. He assumed I was a naive amateur who would fail within a month, allowing his firm to swoop in and buy the foreclosed dirt for pennies. He thought he held all the cards. He did not realize I possessed the 1970 easement that legally strangled his entire corporate dream. I closed the laptop as the battery died. The screen went black, plunging the office back into shadows. I packed my gear into my truck and drove home to my apartment, knowing the war had just shifted from a family dispute to a high-stakes corporate battle. The retaliation came faster than I anticipated. The next morning, the Virginia sun was already baking the asphalt by 9 o'clock. I was standing near the rusted fuel island, wearing heavy canvas work gloves, tearing down a thick curtain of dead ivy from the canopy pillars. The crunch of tires on loose gravel interrupted the steady hum of highway traffic. A white pickup truck, bearing the county municipal seal on the door, rolled onto the lot. It parked at an angle deliberately blocking my own vehicle. A man stepped out. He wore a crisp khaki uniform with a badge embroidered on the chest. He carried a silver metal clipboard and wore dark sunglasses that hid his eyes. He walked with the slow, rolling swagger of a low-level bureaucrat who enjoyed exercising authority over people he deemed vulnerable. "Are you the property owner?" he asked. His tone was flat, carrying an edge of practiced intimidation. I pulled off my canvas gloves and wiped the sweat from my forehead. "Yes, I am. I am Serafina Griffin." He did not offer a handshake. He clicked a ballpoint pen and looked around the lot with visible disgust. "I am a code enforcement officer with the County Environmental Division. We received a complaint from an anonymous concerned citizen regarding hazardous blight on this parcel." An anonymous citizen. The phrase hung in the humid air. I knew exactly who had picked up the phone. Harrison was using public resources to launch his first strike. The officer tapped his pen against the clipboard. "The complaint states you are operating an unpermitted demolition site over unregistered subterranean fuel tanks." He pointed the pen toward the cracked concrete near my boots. "That constitutes a severe environmental hazard. I am issuing a stop work order effective immediately. You will also be subject to a fine of $500 per day until the hazard is remediated." A $500 daily fine would drain my remaining cash reserves in less than a month. It was a classic strong-arm tactic designed to bleed a small property owner dry, forcing them into a distressed sale. Harrison expected me to panic. He expected me to cry, plead, and ultimately surrender the deed. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice. I looked the officer in the eye and offered a polite smile. "Please wait right here," I said. I walked over to the cab of my truck. I reached behind the driver's seat and pulled out a thick 3-ring binder. I had spent 6 months preparing for this purchase. I had anticipated every regulatory hurdle long before I ever signed the closing paperwork. I walked back to the officer and placed the heavy binder onto the hood of his municipal truck. The thick thud made him flinch slightly. I flipped the binder open to the second tab. I slid a laminated document out and handed it to him. "That is a certified environmental Phase 1 assessment," I explained, keeping my voice level and professional. "It was conducted by an independent engineering firm last month. If you turn to page 14, you will see the soil core sampling results." The officer frowned, sliding his sunglasses down the bridge of his nose to read the text. I flipped to the next tab and handed him another laminated sheet. "And that is the municipal closure certificate, dated August 4th, 1985. It proves the underground fuel tanks were legally excavated and removed by the previous owner over 30 years ago. There are no tanks. There is no hazardous blight. I am simply clearing surface vegetation, which does not require a demolition permit under County Code Section 4.2. The officer stared at the closure certificate. His practiced swagger evaporated. He looked from the paperwork to my face, trying to find a weakness to exploit. He found nothing but steady, unyielding eye contact. He cleared his throat and handed the documents back. His pen clicked again, a nervous, rapid sound. "Well," he muttered, "it seems the anonymous tip was misinformed. I will update the file and cancel the stop work order. Have a good day, Miss Griffin. He practically threw himself back into his truck. He shifted the transmission into reverse, kicking up a spray of white dust as he sped off the lot to escape his own embarrassment. I stood in the sun, clutching my binder. The victory was quiet, but it settled deep in my chest. I had repelled the first wave. But the encounter confirmed a dark truth. Harrison was not just waiting for me to fail. He was actively trying to sabotage me. He wanted to ruin my finances, force a tax auction, and steal the land to save his own corporate project. I walked back to the ivy-covered pillar. I knew I needed legal representation to enforce the 1970 easement, and I needed cash to hire the right attorney. My savings were depleted. I had a multi-million-dollar secret buried in the vault, but a secret could not pay retainer fees. I looked toward the cinder block building behind the store. The Mustang Mach-1 was sitting in the dark, waiting. I realized what I had to do. I had to sell the only pristine thing I owned to fund a war against my own blood. And the buyer I needed to find would require a very delicate approach. The dust from the municipal truck had barely settled on the gravel before I formulated my next move. The code enforcement officer was a blunt instrument, a clumsy opening move by a brother who underestimated my preparation. Harrison thought he could scare me off the board with a single threat. He did not realize his interference only confirmed the immense value of the ground beneath my boots. I walked back into the suffocating heat of the cinder block vault. The 1969 Mustang Mach-1 sat in the center of the room, a sleeping giant draped in shadows. I needed a war chest to fight the corporate machine Harrison worked for, and this vehicle was my only collateral. But selling a classic car of this magnitude required discretion. I could not simply place a digital advertisement and invite strangers to my property. I needed a specialized buyer who understood the value of a matching numbers survivor and an unassigned title. I spent the rest of the morning sitting on my overturned milk crate, drafting an email to a high-end vintage auto broker located in downtown Richmond. I attached 3 clear photographs of the vehicle and 1 carefully cropped image of the title. I pressed send and leaned back, waiting for the trap to spring. But before the broker could reply, the sound of tires crushing gravel announced a new visitor. I stepped out of the front office and squinted against the harsh afternoon sun. A pristine silver luxury sport utility vehicle rolled onto the lot. The vehicle looked entirely out of place against the backdrop of cracked asphalt and overgrown weeds. The engine cut off and the driver's side door opened. It was Jessica, my brother Harrison's wife. She stepped out wearing a crisp white linen sundress and designer sandals with thin, delicate heels. She navigated the uneven gravel with practiced, careful steps, holding 2 large plastic cups of iced coffee. Condensation dripped down the sides of the cups, dampening her perfect manicure. "Serafina, honey," she called out. Her voice carried a high musical pitch that was meant to sound affectionate, but always felt like a performance. I stood my ground near the rusted fuel pumps and wiped my dusty hands on my jeans. "Hello, Jessica. What brings you all the way out to the highway?" She reached the concrete pad of the storefront and handed me one of the iced coffees. "I thought you might need a cold drink. It is sweltering out here. I honestly do not know how you tolerate this heat without fainting." I took the cup. The plastic was cold against my blistered palms. "Thank you," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Jessica let her eyes wander over the peeling paint of the canopy, the rusted signage, and the piles of dead ivy I had pulled from the brickwork. She reached into her expensive leather handbag, pulled out a sanitizing wet wipe, and discreetly cleaned her fingers. She thought I did not notice, but I spent my entire career tracking micro-expressions and subtle shifts in behavior. "We are all just so worried about you, Sarah," she said, tossing the used wipe into a nearby trash barrel. "Harrison barely sleeps. He feels terrible about how things ended at the dinner table last week. He knows you are trying to prove a point, but this place is a disaster. It is not safe for a woman to be out here alone doing manual labor." Harrison never lost sleep over anyone but himself. His concern was a calculated fiction. I took a slow sip of the iced coffee, waiting for her to reveal the true purpose of her visit. "He wants to help you," Jessica continued, taking a step closer. "He talked to the human resources director at his firm this morning. They have an opening for an administrative assistant in his division. The pay is steady, and it comes with health benefits. You could sit at a desk in the air conditioning instead of breaking your back out here." The strategy was transparent. They wanted to strip away my independence and place me under Harrison's direct supervision. If I worked for him, he controlled my paycheck, my schedule, and my future. And more importantly, if I took the job, I would be forced to abandon the gas station. "All you have to do is list this property for a quick sale," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Cut your losses. Harrison can even recommend a broker who specializes in distressed commercial lots. You can walk away clean and start fresh in a nice corporate office." The sheer arrogance of the offer settled cold in my chest. They were trying to herd me into a pen. "I appreciate the offer, Jessica," I said, holding her gaze, "but I am not looking for an administrative position, and I am certainly not selling my property." Her practiced smile faltered. A flash of genuine irritation crossed her features before she smoothed it over. "You are being stubborn, Serafina. Harrison's firm is launching a massive project right behind this lot very soon. The Shenandoah Valley development is on a strict timeline. The construction traffic alone will bury this little project of yours. Why fight a losing battle when your family is offering you a lifeline?" She had just handed me a crucial piece of intelligence. The Shenandoah Valley project was on a strict timeline. That meant Harrison was under extreme internal pressure to secure the utility access route. He was running out of time. "I am comfortable with my odds," I replied, handing the iced coffee back to her. "Tell Harrison I said hello." Jessica stared at me, her lips pressed into a thin, tight line. She took the cup, turned on her delicate heel, and marched back to her luxury vehicle. She slammed the door and sped off the lot, her tires spinning in the loose dirt. I watched her brake lights disappear down the highway. The psychological warfare had officially begun. The code enforcer was the stick, Jessica was the carrot. But they both led to the same trap. The next morning, the mail carrier pulled his postal truck up to my temporary mailbox. He handed me a thick, rigid envelope requiring a certified signature. I signed the electronic pad and carried the envelope into my makeshift back office. The return address belonged to a corporate law firm in the financial district. I sliced the top open and slid out a stack of crisp, watermarked documents. It was a formal, legal offer to purchase my quarter-acre property. The buyer was listed as Apex Holdings Limited Liability Company. I flipped to the financial summary page. The purchase price offered was $420,000. That was exactly 3 times what I had paid for the land just a few weeks prior. To a desperate, broke woman standing in a rotting building, $420,000 looked like a lottery ticket. It looked like an instant exit strategy, a chance to double my net worth and walk away a winner. But I was not a desperate woman. I was a logistics analyst sitting on a multi-million-dollar choke point. I opened my laptop and connected to my mobile hotspot. I logged back into the State Corporate Commission database. I typed in Apex Holdings Limited Liability Company. The search results loaded a fresh registration page. The company had been incorporated exactly 4 days ago. I scrolled down to the registered agent section. The name listed was a man named Gregory Finch. I opened a new tab and searched the name Gregory Finch, Richmond, Virginia. A professional profile loaded on a corporate networking site. Gregory Finch was a junior acquisitions attorney, and his current employer was Vance Commercial Development, the exact same firm where my brother Harrison worked as a vice president. A cold, sharp laugh escaped my throat. Apex Holdings was a shell company. Harrison knew his firm needed my land to secure the utility easement for the Shenandoah project, but he also knew I would never willingly sell the property to him after the way he treated me at the dining table. So he created a dummy corporation to mask his identity, hoping I would be blinded by the cash offer and sign away my rights without asking questions. He thought I was foolish enough to jump at the first pile of money dangled in front of my face. He thought my decade of careful financial planning was a fluke. I opened a blank word processing document on my laptop. I did not write a lengthy emotional response. I did not accuse him of fraud or reveal that I knew his secret. When your opponent is making a mistake, you do not interrupt them. You let their arrogance blind them while you quietly build your fortress. I typed 2 simple sentences. Apex Holdings. The property located at Highway 11 is not for sale at any price. I printed the letter, folded it into a standard envelope, and addressed it to Gregory Finch. I drove to the post office and sent it via certified mail so I would have a receipt of delivery. Harrison was going to open that letter and realize his shell company strategy had failed. He was going to realize I could not be bought, intimidated, or manipulated. When I returned to the gas station, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I looked at the screen. It was an incoming call from the vintage auto broker in Richmond. He had seen the photographs of the Mustang and the pristine unassigned title. He wanted to meet in person. I stood in the fading evening light, looking at the heavy steel door of the vault. I was about to turn a forgotten piece of machinery into a formidable war chest. But as I listened to the distant roar of highway traffic, I knew Harrison would not stop at fake corporations and pity jobs. The rejection of his shell company offer was going to enrage him. He was going to stop playing games and bring the full, crushing weight of the corporate legal system down on my head. And I needed to be ready for the freeze. The morning after I mailed the rejection letter to Apex Holdings, a long, black, enclosed transport trailer idled on the gravel shoulder of Highway 11. The air brakes hissed a sharp warning as the heavy rig settled into park. A man named Elias stepped down from the cab. He wore a tailored charcoal suit without a tie and carried a slim leather briefcase. I had researched Elias extensively. He catered exclusively to high-net-worth private collectors who valued absolute discretion over flashy public auctions. He did not ask questions about family drama or corporate disputes. He only cared about rare metal and clean provenance. I met him at the edge of the asphalt and let him pass the overgrown fuel pumps to the cinder block building in the back. I unlocked the heavy padlock and pulled the steel door open. The familiar smell of dry concrete and ancient motor oil spilled into the morning air. Elias stepped inside and clicked on a high-lumen inspection flashlight. I grabbed the edge of the stiff canvas tarp and pulled it back, exposing the 1969 Mustang Mach 1. Elias did not gasp or exclaim. He was a professional. But the sudden halt in his breathing told me everything I needed to know. He moved around the vehicle in slow, deliberate steps, sweeping his light over the flawless quarter panels, the factory original chrome bumpers, and the pristine undercarriage. He checked the vehicle identification number stamped on the engine block, cross-referencing it with a worn reference manual he pulled from his pocket. The heavy metallic thud of the driver's side door closing echoed in the enclosed space, a sound of perfectly preserved automotive history. He turned to me and asked to see the paperwork. I handed him the crisp, unassigned bearer title from the fireproof lockbox. He inspected the blue ink signature under a small ultraviolet light. He checked the watermark and the embossed state seal. Satisfied, he placed the document carefully onto the hood of the car. He offered me $115,000. I stood in the dusty vault looking at the deep, gloss black paint of the Mustang. A profound internal conflict tightened my chest. That vehicle was my only tangible safety net. It was a guaranteed ticket out of poverty if my gas station failed. Selling it meant converting a priceless artifact into liquid cash for a war I might not win. But holding on to it meant surrendering my leverage, allowing Harrison to crush me under the weight of his corporate resources. I had to sacrifice the artifact to build a fortress. I nodded my agreement and signed the buyer line on the title, transferring ownership. Elias opened his briefcase and pulled out a secure encrypted tablet. He executed a direct wire transfer, routing the funds straight into my newly established business checking account. 3 minutes later, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I checked the screen. The bank notification confirmed a deposit of $115,000. The transaction was complete. I watched the transport driver secure the heavy winch cables to the undercarriage of the Mustang. The gears ground loudly as the sleeping giant was slowly dragged out of the vault and into the dark belly of the enclosed trailer. When the transport truck pulled away, merging onto the highway, the cinderblock vault felt hollow. But my bank account was armed. I did not spend a single dollar on a new wardrobe or a comfortable apartment. I drove my dusty pickup truck straight into the financial district of downtown Richmond. I walked into the polished high-rise office of a commercial real estate attorney named Marcus Thorne. Marcus was known in the legal community as a ruthless tactician. He did not represent families holding hands at mediation tables. He represented commercial entities fighting over multi-million-dollar tracts of earth. I sat in a leather chair across from his wide glass desk and slid the yellowed 1970 deed of easement toward him. Marcus adjusted his reading glasses and scanned the brittle page. I watched his eyes track the legal jargon. He noticed the misfiled parcel identification number and the unsevered utility rights. He looked up at me, an expression of sharp, calculated respect settling on his features. "You hold the subterranean routing rights for the entire 300-acre Shenandoah Valley," he said, his voice low and steady. "Whoever wants to build back there has to trench directly through your lot." I nodded. "And the developer trying to build back there is Vance Commercial. My brother is their vice president of acquisitions. They just sent a shell company to offer me a fraction of what this is worth. I need you to secure my perimeter." I paid his steep initial retainer fee without hesitation. Marcus drafted the articles of organization for a new entity. I named it Ironclad Holdings. The name felt fitting. My personal assets were now shielded behind a corporate veil matching the exact strategy Harrison attempted to use against me. But I was a logistics analyst. Securing the utility easement was only the first step in tightening the choke point. I pulled a rolled topographical map from my bag and spread it across the glass desk. I pointed to a small triangular wedge of land abutting the western edge of my gas station. It was a neglected 2-acre strip covered in dense scrub pine and thorny brush. "I need you to look at the traffic logistics," I said, tracing a path with my pen. "The Shenandoah Valley project needs my lot for water and sewer lines. But if you calculate the turning radius required for heavy commercial construction equipment and eventual consumer traffic, they need a physical highway exit ramp. The State Transit Authority will not permit a curb cut directly onto the highway from their valley. They have to route their road through this specific 2-acre triangle." Marcus typed the coordinates into his terminal, accessing the county property records. He smiled a thin, predatory smile. "The owner of this 2-acre parcel died intestate 32 years ago," Marcus explained. "The property has sat in bureaucratic limbo ever since. It has accumulated 3 decades of unpaid, delinquent property taxes. The county never bothered to seize it for public auction because the land was considered worthless scrub." I took a blank certified check from my bag. "Tell me how to buy it," I said. Marcus executed a brilliant legal maneuver. Instead of petitioning for an auction, we filed a direct tax lien redemption. I used a portion of my new auto broker funds to pay the county every single dollar of the delinquent taxes, penalties, and accumulated interest. By satisfying the municipal debt in full, I secured a priority tax deed to the triangular parcel. I walked out of the downtown high-rise as the sun began to set over Richmond. I took a deep breath of the warm city air. In a span of 8 hours, I had transformed from a broke sister fighting a desperate defensive battle into the managing director of Ironclad Holdings. I now owned the exclusive subterranean utility rights and the only physical highway exit ramp for a $400 million luxury development. I possessed a total airtight monopoly. The dramatic irony was staggering. My family still believed I was eating instant noodles in a condemned building on the verge of total financial collapse. They thought my rejection of their pity job was the foolish pride of a stubborn failure. Harrison thought his biggest problem was a stubborn sister holding a 1/4 acre of dirt. He had no idea I was quietly laying landmines around his entire career. I drove back to the gas station and parked under the rusted canopy. The lot was quiet. The crickets chirped their familiar evening rhythm. But the silence felt temporary, like the heavy stillness before a severe thunderstorm. Tomorrow morning, Gregory Finch would open the certified mail containing my 2-sentence rejection letter. He would hand that letter to Harrison. My brother would realize his shell company trick had failed, and his ego would not tolerate the defiance. He would stop playing games with fake job offers and anonymous code enforcers. He would run to his corporate lawyers and unleash the heavy artillery designed to crush small property owners. The quiet phase of the war was over. The legal freeze was coming, and I needed to brace for impact. The process server arrived on a Tuesday morning. I was standing on a rusted aluminum ladder scraping layers of peeling white paint from the front fascia of the convenience store. A nondescript gray sedan pulled onto the gravel shoulder. A man in a wrinkled, short-sleeved shirt stepped out into the humid Virginia heat. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer a polite greeting. He simply walked to the base of my ladder and held out a thick manila envelope. "Serafina Griffin," he asked. I climbed down, wiping a mixture of sweat and toxic dust from my eyes. "Yes, you have been served," he said. He dropped the heavy package into my hands, turned his back, and drove away before I could even break the seal. The envelope felt unnaturally heavy. I carried it into the back office and set it on my makeshift wooden desk. I sliced the paper open and pulled out a dense stack of legal documents. The header of the first page read, "Motion for preliminary injunction and complaint for quiet title." The plaintiff listed on the filing was Apex Holdings Limited Liability Company. Harrison had deployed his corporate artillery. I read through the 40 pages of fabricated legalese. The complaint alleged that the original property boundaries of my gas station were historically inaccurate. It claimed a 50-year-old surveying error rendered my deed invalid and encroached on the neighboring 300-acre parcel. It was a frivolous claim. It was a textbook strategic lawsuit designed to force a vulnerable defendant into submission through sheer financial exhaustion. The final page requested an immediate injunction from the county judge to freeze all construction and renovation permits on my parcel until the boundary dispute could be resolved in court. I packed the documents into my truck and drove straight to the downtown financial district. Sitting in the polished, air-conditioned office of my attorney, Marcus Thorne, the reality of the corporate legal system settled over me. Marcus reviewed the complaint with sharp, clinical detachment. He set the paperwork on his glass desk and folded his hands. "They are filing a quiet title action to tie up your land," he explained, his voice level. "This is a war of attrition. Harrison's firm employs an army of salaried attorneys. It costs them nothing to print 100 motions and drown you in discovery requests. Every response I file on your behalf will cost you billable hours." I thought about the $115,000 sitting in my business account. It was a formidable war chest, but corporate litigation could consume it in a matter of months. "They are not trying to win on the merits of the case," Marcus continued, looking me directly in the eye. "They know the boundary dispute is fictional. They are trying to break your spirit. They want you to panic and sign a settlement just to make the legal fees stop." "File the motion to dismiss," I said, keeping my posture rigid. "Do whatever it takes to stall their injunction. I am not folding." I walked out of the high-rise building and drove back to my tiny fourth-floor apartment. That night, the psychological toll of the lawsuit took root. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the clanking of the old radiator. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3 in the morning. If you have ever had someone use their wealth and influence to crush your truth, you know the exact flavor of that late-night panic. It is a dry mouth and a racing heart. It is the terrifying, creeping thought that Harrison might actually win simply because he had more capital to burn. I was a single woman fighting a billionaire development firm. The sheer scale of the opposition felt suffocating. I imagined losing the property, losing my savings, and crawling back to my family in utter defeat. I could practically hear Harrison's triumphant laughter echoing in the dark room. But then I remembered the cinder block vault. I remembered the yellowed 1970 easement securing the underground utility lines. I remembered the tax deed I purchased for the highway exit ramp. I possessed the legal high ground. Harrison was swinging a heavy sword in the dark, but I owned the floor he was standing on. I forced myself out of bed. I could not control the county court schedule, but I could control my property. The next morning, I returned to the gas station. Since the pending injunction threatened to halt any major structural renovations, I focused all my energy on cosmetic manual labor. I rented a heavy floor sander and began stripping the decades of grime from the interior concrete. The machine vibrated fiercely, shaking my arms and vibrating my teeth. The physical exertion was a necessary anchor. It kept my mind from spinning into anxiety. I found the heavy brass plumb bob I had used to break the lock on the vault. I placed it on the corner of my wooden desk. It became a daily reminder of gravity and resilience. A plumb bob only works when it hangs perfectly still, resisting the wind. I needed to remain perfectly still while Harrison blew hot air. Over the next 3 weeks, Marcus executed a brilliant defensive strategy. He filed a blistering motion to dismiss, citing my environmental reports, the historical tax records, and an ironclad chain of title. He demanded the judge sanction Apex Holdings for filing a frivolous claim. The aggressive countermaneuver tied the corporate lawyers in knots. The judge delayed ruling on the injunction, demanding more evidentiary hearings. The legal freeze was failing to drain my accounts fast enough. I sat in my office tracking the timeline of the Shenandoah Valley project on my laptop. Harrison's firm was hemorrhaging money, holding 300 acres of undeveloped land without approved municipal permits. Investors were likely demanding progress reports. The construction delays were causing internal chaos, and Harrison was the executive responsible for clearing the path. Because the court system was moving too slowly for his timeline, Harrison realized he could not bleed me dry financially before his own deadlines expired. He needed a faster resolution. He needed me to surrender the deed voluntarily. So he changed his strategy. He shifted from the legal arena back to the emotional one. He decided to abandon the corporate lawyers and reach for the one weapon that had always worked against me in the past. He reached for family guilt. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. My phone vibrated against the wooden spool desk. I wiped the sanding dust from my hands and looked at the caller identification. It was Caroline, my mother. I let it ring 3 times before sliding my thumb across the screen. "Hello? Serafina, honey." Her voice floated through the speaker, dripping with an artificial sweetness that made the hair on my arms stand up. "It has been weeks since we saw you. You missed your father's golf tournament, and you have not returned your aunt's text messages. We miss you." I kept my tone neutral. "I have been busy with the property." "Well, you simply must take a break," she insisted. "I am making a large pot roast this Sunday. The whole family will be here. I want you to come to dinner. We need to catch up." There was a subtle sharpness underneath her maternal tone. It was the voice she used when attendance was not optional. It was the voice of a director calling an actor to the stage. I knew exactly what this was. It was a coordinated ambush. Harrison had run out of legal options, so he ran to our mother. He spun a narrative painting himself as the victim and me as the unreasonable antagonist. He recruited Caroline to orchestrate a psychological intervention designed to shame me into signing away my land. I should have declined. I should have told her I was busy and disconnected the call. But avoiding the dinner would only validate their false narrative. It would signal fear. If I wanted to prove that their manipulation no longer held power over me, I had to sit at their table and look them in the eye. "I will be there at 6, I said. I ended the call and set the phone down next to the brass plumb bob. The corporate war had temporarily stalled, but the family war was about to reach a boiling point. I was walking directly into a trap set by the people who shared my last name, and I needed to prepare myself for the emotional shrapnel that was coming. I parked my dusty pickup truck along the manicured curb of my parents' Richmond estate. The neighborhood was a quiet enclave of sprawling brick colonials and perfectly trimmed boxwood hedges. The contrast between my life and theirs had never felt more pronounced. My hands were rough calloused from operating the heavy floor sander, and my fingernails were stained with chemical primer. I smoothed the front of my simple gray sweater, took a slow, measured breath, and walked up the pristine slate pathway to the heavy oak front door. I knew this Sunday dinner was not a social invitation. It was a tribunal. When I stepped into the foyer, the familiar scent of roasted meat and expensive floral perfume washed over me. I walked toward the dining room, expecting to hear the chatter of extended family members. But the house was unnervingly quiet. I paused in the arched doorway. The large mahogany table was not set for a family gathering. It was set for 5 people. My father sat at the far end, methodically slicing a piece of bread, his eyes focused entirely on his plate. He had spent his entire life mastering the art of silent complicity, allowing my mother to fight every battle and dictate every family narrative. Harrison sat across from him, leaning back in a plush, upholstered chair, swirling a glass of amber scotch. Jessica sat beside her husband, looking immaculate in a tailored silk blouse. My mother, Caroline, stood near the sideboard, arranging a silver serving tray. There were no aunts, there were no cousins. It was an orchestrated, isolated ambush. "Serafina, honey," Caroline said, turning around with a bright, tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "Sit down. I poured you a glass of water." I took the empty seat opposite Harrison. The heavy silver cutlery felt cold against my skin. I did not unfold my napkin. I kept my posture straight, waiting for the theatrical performance to begin. Caroline took her seat at the head of the table. She did not bother with small talk. She bypassed the weather and the pleasantries, diving straight into the prepared script. "We are very worried about you, Serafina," she began, her voice adopting a low, tragic register. "Your behavior lately has become increasingly erratic. You are isolating yourself in that awful rundown building, and you are making decisions that are starting to affect the rest of us." I looked at her. "How is my property affecting you, Mother?" Harrison let out a sharp, patronizing sigh. He set his scotch glass down on the mahogany surface. "Because you are playing business in a sandbox you do not understand, Sarah. You are dealing with real corporate entities now, and your stubborn pride is becoming a liability." Caroline leaned forward, resting her manicured hands on the table. "We received a very disturbing phone call this week, Serafina. The executives at Apex Holdings contacted your brother." The statement hung in the air. A profound, surreal silence filled my ears. The executives at Apex Holdings. I stared at my mother, my mind racing to process the sheer audacity of the lie. I knew with absolute certainty that Apex Holdings was a dummy corporation registered to a junior attorney in Harrison's own office. Harrison was the executive of Apex Holdings. Yet here they were, sitting in the formal dining room, looking me dead in the eye and weaving a fictional narrative to manipulate my emotions. Harrison had fed our mother a fabricated story, and she was weaponizing it against me. "What did these executives say?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly flat. Harrison adjusted his cuffs, projecting an aura of weary corporate responsibility. "They said you sent them a highly unprofessional rejection letter. They are a serious development firm, Sarah. They offered you a generous buyout to take that toxic nightmare off your hands. When you refused, they called me. They knew we were related through local industry connections. They asked me to talk some sense into you before they escalate the matter and bury you in litigation." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. He was pretending to be a protective older brother, shielding his naive sister from a ruthless corporate predator. He was using the phantom threat of Apex Holdings to pressure me into surrendering the deed to his own shell company. Jessica chimed in, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "We just want what is best for you. You are out of your depth. Why fight a losing battle when you can walk away with a profit and let Harrison handle the corporate headache?" I looked at my father. He continued chewing his food, staring at the intricate pattern on the china plate. He was actively ignoring the psychological slaughter happening 2 feet away. I looked back at Caroline. My own mother was participating in a fraud. She was aiding my brother in an attempt to steal my multi-million-dollar asset. She believed his lies because she wanted to believe them. She preferred the narrative where Harrison was the successful savior and I was the erratic failure needing to be rescued. "You are embarrassing this family," Caroline said, her voice hardening. Her tragic facade cracked, revealing the raw, controlling anger underneath. "You are acting like a petulant child. You need to sign the property over to Apex tomorrow. Stop this foolish charade and sell the land." The heavy grandfather clock in the corner of the dining room ticked a steady, rhythmic pulse. Tick, tick, tick. I sat in the suffocating silence, listening to the mechanical heartbeat of the room. A younger version of myself would have crumbled under the weight of their synchronized disapproval. A younger version of myself would have cried, pleaded for their understanding, or tried to justify the purchase. I would have handed them the keys just to buy back their affection. But I was no longer the girl who accepted the dry end piece of the roast. I was the managing director of Ironclad Holdings. I held the unsevered utility rights to a 300-acre valley, and I owned the priority tax deed to their highway exit ramp. I possessed the legal high ground, and I was staring at a table full of desperate people who were drowning in their own arrogance. I did not scream. I did not pull the corporate registration documents from my bag and throw the truth in their faces. Marcus Thorne had warned me against showing my cards before the final hand was dealt. If Harrison knew I had uncovered his shell company, he would panic and change his tactics. I needed him to remain blind. "Why must you always be so difficult?" Caroline demanded, her voice rising sharply. "Why do you insist on humiliating us?" I placed my hands flat on the polished mahogany wood. I felt the solid grain beneath my palms. I looked at Harrison, who was watching me with a smug, expectant smirk. I looked at Jessica, who was practically vibrating with nervous energy. And then I looked at my mother. "I am not selling," I said. The words were quiet, but they landed with the force of a physical blow. Harrison's smirk vanished. Caroline recoiled as if I had slapped her across the face. I pushed my chair back, letting the wooden legs scrape loudly across the expensive rug. I stood up, tall and steady. I did not offer an explanation or a defensive excuse. I turned my back on the untouched food, the expensive crystal, and the toxic illusion of my family. I walked out of the dining room, down the wide hallway, and out the heavy oak front door. I stepped into the warm, humid Virginia evening and walked to my dusty pickup truck. When I started the engine, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. The bridge was burned. I had officially severed the emotional chains that tied me to their approval. But as I drove away from the wealthy suburb, I knew the war was about to mutate. Harrison had failed to scare me with the code enforcer. He had failed to buy me with a shell company. He had failed to freeze me with a lawsuit. And now he had failed to shame me at the family dinner table. Narcissists do not accept defeat gracefully. When they cannot control your decisions, they try to control how other people see you. By walking out of that dining room, I had guaranteed the next phase of the battle. Harrison and Caroline were going to activate the extended family network. They were going to paint me as a vindictive, greedy villain. The social isolation was coming, and I had to prepare myself for the silent, agonizing smear campaign that would try to break my spirit in the dark. The fallout from the Sunday dinner did not arrive like a sudden storm. It seeped into my life like a slow, creeping poison. Monday morning brought a strange, heavy silence. By Tuesday afternoon, the poison reached my phone. I was in the back office of the gas station reviewing an invoice for roofing materials when the screen of my cellular device lit up. It was my Aunt Helen. I had not spoken to her since Thanksgiving. I let the call go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, my cousin David called, then my Uncle Robert. I clicked the voicemail icon and listened to Aunt Helen. Her voice trembled with a mixture of practiced outrage and eager gossip. "Serafina, I just heard what you are doing to your brother. I am disgusted. After everything your parents have done for you, trying to extort Harrison out of pure jealousy is a new low. You need to apologize and stop this ridiculous vendetta before you destroy his career. Do not bother calling me back until you fix this." Extort him. The word echoed in the dusty office. Harrison had not wasted a single minute. The moment I walked out of the dining room, he spun a masterful web of fiction. He painted himself as the exhausted, benevolent brother trying to save his troubled sister from financial ruin. He told the extended family that I had demanded an exorbitant sum of money, threatening to sabotage his company project if he did not pay my ransom. He transformed my refusal to sell into a cruel act of sibling rivalry. I opened my social media profile. The digital erasure was already underway. David had blocked me. 2 of my female cousins had removed me from their friend lists. I was exiled from the family group chat. In the span of 48 hours, I was stripped of my familial identity and recast as the greedy, vindictive villain of the Griffin family. The social isolation was a calculated weapon. Narcissists use the smear campaign to break your spirit when they can no longer control your actions. They leverage the group dynamic to make you feel crazy, hoping the sheer weight of collective disapproval will force you to surrender your boundaries. That night, the loneliness hit me with a crushing physical weight. I sat on the cold concrete floor of the back office, leaning my head against the cinder block wall. The only light in the room came from the pale blue glow of my laptop screen, illuminating my face in the dark. It was a stark contrast to my mother's bright, loud dining room, filled with crystal and silver. I listened to the distant hum of the highway traffic. A heavy freight truck shifted gears in the distance, a low, rumbling vibration that rattled the window panes. My chest ached with the specific, dull pain of being fundamentally misunderstood by the people who shared my blood. I opened a blank document on my computer. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I felt an overwhelming urge to defend myself. I wanted to draft a long, detailed message exposing the shell company, the fake job offer, and the fraudulent lawsuit. I wanted to upload the legal documents and tag every single aunt and cousin to prove my innocence. I typed 3 paragraphs. My hands shook with adrenaline. And then I stopped. I stared at the words on the screen. If I posted the evidence, I would be fighting the war on their terms. I would be engaging in the messy, emotional drama they thrived on. Defending myself to people who were committed to misunderstanding me was a trap. It would only give Harrison the opportunity to twist my words and claim I was unstable. I pressed the delete key, erasing the paragraphs one by one. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. The silence of the gas station wrapped around me, but it no longer felt oppressive. It felt like a clean loneliness. It was the sharp, clear solitude of a person who no longer required outside validation to know the truth. I realized that true power is the ability to withstand being the villain in a false narrative without breaking character. I let them build their loud, intricate lies. I let the rumors spread across the wealthy Richmond suburbs. A lie that large requires constant maintenance to survive. The truth only requires time. Over the next few weeks, I embraced the isolation. I threw myself into the physical restoration of the property. I repaired the roof framing. I painted the exterior brick a clean matte white. I polished the glass storefront windows until they gleamed in the afternoon sun. Every drop of sweat was a deposit into my own future. While my hands were busy, my mind remained fixed on the corporate timeline. I checked the county municipal permitting database every morning. My attorney, Marcus Thorne, had successfully stalled the quiet title lawsuit, preventing Apex Holdings from securing a swift victory in civil court. But Harrison was running out of time. His firm, Vance Commercial, was bleeding capital, holding 300 acres of premium land without approval to break ground. The investors were getting restless. Harrison made a desperate, arrogant miscalculation. Because the civil lawsuit was trapped in legal limbo, he assumed he could push the final project permits through the county zoning board anyway. He believed the county commissioners would be so dazzled by the $400 million investment, they would overlook the unresolved utility access dispute. He thought he could secure the municipal green light and figure out the legal details later. The public hearing for the Shenandoah Valley project was scheduled for the first Tuesday of the following month. I marked the date on the calendar hanging above my wooden desk. The smear campaign had kept me hidden in the shadows. My family assumed I was hiding out of shame, paralyzed by their rejection, and drowning in legal debt. They thought the war was over, and they had won. The morning of the zoning board hearing, the Virginia sky was overcast and gray. I did not wear a tailored suit or an expensive dress. I wanted to embody the exact opposite of Harrison's corporate facade. I chose a plain dark gray sweater, dark jeans, and sensible boots. I pulled my hair back into a simple knot. I drove my pickup truck to the county municipal building. The parking lot was filled with luxury sedans and news vans. The local press was covering the hearing, anticipating the approval of the largest commercial development in the history of the county. I walked through the double glass doors and entered the main assembly hall. The room was packed with local business owners, politicians, and executives from Vance Commercial. I found an empty seat in the very back row. I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. Harrison stood near the front podium wearing a bespoke navy suit that probably cost more than my first car. He looked confident, charismatic, and entirely in his element. He held a laser pointer, laughing easily with one of the county commissioners. He was the golden boy, preparing to deliver his crowning achievement to the public. He had no idea that the sister he discarded and smeared was sitting 40 feet away, holding the invisible match that would detonate his entire career. The battle was moving from the private shadows of family gossip into the harsh fluorescent light of the public record. And I was ready to watch the golden boy burn. The fluorescent lights of the county assembly hall hummed a low, persistent note that seemed to amplify the tension in the room. I sat perfectly still in the back row, watching the polished theater of corporate zoning unfold. Harrison took the podium with the practiced ease of a man who believed the rules of gravity did not apply to him. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and flashed a brilliant, media-ready smile. For the next 20 minutes, Harrison delivered a masterclass in corporate persuasion. He projected massive, high-resolution, three-dimensional renderings onto the projection screen. He described the Shenandoah Valley project as a beacon of economic revitalization, promising thousands of local jobs and millions in municipal tax revenue. He painted a picture of a gleaming luxury utopia, speaking with such conviction that half the room seemed ready to hand him a blank check. I watched his performance with cold, analytical detachment. He was smooth, he was articulate, and he was standing on a foundation of sand. "Thank you, Mr. Griffin," said the chief county commissioner. He was an older man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, sitting at the center of the raised dais. "Your presentation is certainly impressive. The board recognizes the immense economic value your firm brings to the county." Harrison nodded graciously, placing a hand over his heart. "We are committed to a long-term partnership with this community, Commissioner. We are ready to break ground the moment the permits are finalized." The commissioner adjusted his glasses and looked down at a thick stack of legal folders resting on his desk. He did not smile. However, the commissioner continued, his voice dropping an octave. "The board has spent the last week reviewing the final site plans submitted by your engineering team. We have identified a critical logistical deficiency." The assembly hall went dead silent. The easy, charismatic smile on Harrison's face faltered slightly. "A deficiency?" Commissioner Harrison asked, gripping the edges of the wooden podium. "Our engineers are the best in the state. I assure you, any minor oversight can be corrected immediately." "This is not a minor oversight," the commissioner replied, pulling a specific document from the stack. "The State Highway Administration formally denied your request for a new curb cut directly onto Highway 11. According to municipal transit regulations, you cannot create a new commercial intersection on that stretch of road. Your only legally permissible entry and exit route for construction equipment and eventual consumer traffic is through the adjacent 2-acre triangular parcel." Harrison relaxed slightly, a smug expression returning to his features. "Yes, we are aware of the transit restriction. Our legal team is currently finalizing the acquisition of that specific parcel. It is a minor administrative delay." The commissioner looked up over the rim of his glasses. The room felt suddenly devoid of oxygen. "You are finalizing the acquisition?" the commissioner asked. "That is fascinating, Mr. Griffin, because the county tax records indicate that specific parcel was purchased outright 3 weeks ago via a priority tax deed redemption. The owner is an entity called Ironclad Holdings. We see no recorded easement or transfer agreement between Ironclad Holdings and your firm." Harrison's face went chalk white. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a panicked ghost in a custom suit. He gripped the podium tighter, his knuckles turning pale. "Ironclad Holdings," he stammered. "There must be a clerical error. That land was tied up in delinquent taxes for decades." "There is no error," the commissioner stated, tapping a finger against the document. "Furthermore, our legal review of your site plan revealed a historical, unsevered utility easement. The subterranean routing rights for water and sewer lines to your entire 300-acre valley are exclusively held by the adjacent quarter-acre commercial lot. The property currently registered as a gas station." A low murmur rippled through the assembly hall. The local business owners and journalists began whispering, exchanging confused glances. "We are in active litigation regarding that boundary," Harrison interrupted, his voice rising in pitch, losing its smooth corporate polish. "The owner of that gas station is an unstable individual. We have a quiet title action pending in civil court. We will have the rights secured shortly." The commissioner shook his head, a gesture of weary finality. "Pending litigation does not grant you municipal building rights, Mr. Griffin. You are asking this board to approve a $400 million commercial development when you do not possess legal road access to the highway and you do not hold the utility routing rights for plumbing or water. You have presented us with a landlocked island." Harrison opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a man who had stepped onto an elevator only to realize the floor was missing. "The board cannot approve these permits in good faith," the commissioner declared, striking his wooden gavel against the sound block. The loud crack echoed off the acoustic ceiling tiles. "The Shenandoah Valley project is tabled indefinitely until Vance Commercial can produce legally binding access agreements for both the transit route and the utility easement. This hearing is adjourned." The room erupted into chaos. Journalists scrambled to the front, trying to push microphones into Harrison's face. Executives from Vance Commercial shot out of their chairs, their faces dark with fury, surrounding Harrison, demanding answers. I remained seated in the back row. The gray sweater felt warm against my skin. I did not gloat. I did not stand up and shout. I simply watched the golden boy of the Griffin family drown in the reality of his own arrogance. Harrison pushed through the crowd of angry executives, his eyes wild, scanning the room for an exit. As he shoved his way toward the center aisle, his gaze swept over the back row. He stopped dead. Through the sea of moving bodies, our eyes locked. He saw me sitting there in my plain clothes, my hands folded quietly in my lap. The confusion on his face morphed into a sudden, horrifying realization. He saw the cold, steady calculation in my eyes. He realized the timing of the tax deed, the specific legal defense blocking his shell company, and the sudden exposure of the historical easement were not isolated strokes of bad luck. He realized I was Ironclad Holdings. I did not smile. I gave him a single, tiny, imperceptible nod. Harrison physically recoiled, taking a step backward, bumping into a reporter. The fear in his eyes was absolute. He turned and fled through the double glass doors, escaping into the humid Virginia morning. I stood up, smoothed my sweater, and walked calmly out of the building a few minutes later. I climbed into my pickup truck and drove back to the gas station. The victory was profound, but it was not the end of the war. I had publicly humiliated a severe narcissist and stalled a massive corporate project. Harrison was cornered. His firm was bleeding money, his investors were angry, and his reputation as a master dealmaker was shattered. When you corner a desperate man, he does not usually surrender. He attacks. I parked under the rusted canopy of the gas station and walked into the front office. I knew Harrison would not wait for the lawyers to draft a new strategy. He was operating on pure adrenaline and wounded ego. He would seek immediate, visceral revenge. I pulled my cellular phone from my pocket and placed it face up on the front counter. I checked the battery level, ensuring it was fully charged. I opened the voice recording application and left it running in the background. I did not have to wait long. Less than an hour later, the roar of an engine shattered the quiet afternoon. A sleek black sports car swerved wildly onto the gravel lot, kicking up a massive cloud of white dust. The vehicle slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt just inches from the front glass doors of the convenience store. The driver's side door flew open. Harrison stepped out. He was no longer the polished executive. His tie was ripped loose, his suit jacket was crumpled, and his chest heaved with ragged, furious breaths. The mask was gone. The monster was loose, and he was walking straight toward the trap. The heavy glass door of the convenience store swung open, hitting the interior doorstop with a sharp crack. Harrison stood in the threshold. The afternoon sun cast a long, distorted shadow across the faded linoleum floor. He looked nothing like the polished executive who had stood at the county podium just an hour prior. His custom navy suit jacket was wrinkled and unbuttoned. His silk tie hung loose around his neck, resembling a frayed noose. Perspiration darkened the collar of his expensive dress shirt, and his chest heaved with rapid, uneven breaths. He stepped into the room, bringing the smell of burnt rubber and heated asphalt with him. He did not say a word at first. He just stood there, vibrating with a feral, unpredictable energy. I remained standing behind the front counter. My phone rested face up next to the cash register, its screen dark, but the recording application capturing every sound in the room. Virginia is a one-party consent state for audio surveillance. I did not need his permission to document his unraveling. I rested my hands flat on the scratched countertop, keeping my posture relaxed and my expression neutral. "You think you are clever," Harrison finally said, his voice a low, ragged whisper that sounded like tearing fabric. "You think you have won some grand victory because you played a cheap trick at a municipal hearing." I did not respond. Silence is a mirror. When you refuse to engage a narcissist, they are forced to look at their own reflection, and the image usually enrages them further. He took a step closer, closing the distance between us. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated with pure panic. "You are nothing, Serafina. You have always been nothing. A mediocre bean counter sitting in a cubicled basement, playing with spreadsheets while real people build the world. You do not belong in this arena. You are out of your depth, and you are going to drown." He began pacing the narrow aisle between the empty display shelves. His expensive leather shoes scuffed against the grit on the floor. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" he demanded, his volume rising with every syllable. "Do you comprehend the sheer scale of the capital you just jeopardized? Vance Commercial is a billion-dollar entity. We have politicians on speed dial. We have judges in our pocket. You are a single, unmarried woman living in a slum holding a deed to a toxic trash heap. You cannot stop this development. You are a speed bump." "If I am just a speed bump," I said, keeping my tone even and unbothered, "why are you sweating, Harrison?" The question struck him like a physical blow. He stopped pacing. The veins in his neck bulged against his skin. His hands curled into tight, shaking fists at his sides. The veneer of corporate superiority evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, cornered animal. He lunged toward a display rack. His arm swept across the metal shelf, sending a row of empty cardboard display boxes clattering to the floor. He turned and spotted an antique metal oil can resting near the doorway. It was a heavy, vintage piece I had salvaged from the vault. He drew his foot back and kicked the steel cylinder with all his might. The heavy metal can launched through the air and slammed into the brick wall. The loud, hollow clatter echoed off the exterior metal canopy, ringing in my ears long after the object settled into the dirt. "I will destroy you," Harrison screamed, the sound tearing from his throat. "I will tie this property up in appellate court for the next 20 years. I will bleed your bank accounts until you are begging for spare change. I will go to Mother tonight and have her write you out of the family trust. You will be erased from our legacy. I will take this land from you for pennies, and I will pave over it without giving you a second thought." He leaned over the counter, placing his face inches from mine. I could smell the stale coffee and bitter adrenaline on his breath. "You are going to sign the deed over to Apex Holdings tomorrow morning," he hissed, "or I will make sure you spend the rest of your pathetic life regretting the day you ever decided to challenge me." He stared into my eyes, waiting for me to flinch. He expected tears. He expected an apology. He expected the old Serafina who used to shrink away from his loud, explosive tantrums when we were children. But I did not shrink. I looked at the beads of moisture rolling down his temples. I noticed the slight tremor in his jaw. I saw the profound terror hiding just beneath his rage. "Are you finished?" I asked. Harrison blinked. The total lack of fear in my voice short-circuited his brain. He stood frozen for a long second, unable to process my calm defiance. He realized his intimidation tactics were useless. He let out a frustrated, guttural sound, pushed off the counter, and stormed out the front door. He climbed into his sports car, slammed the door, and threw the transmission into gear. The tires spun wildly on the loose gravel, launching a spray of white stones against the brick facade of my building. He peeled out onto the highway, swerving recklessly into the afternoon traffic. I stood in the quiet office. The dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight pouring through the windows. I picked up my phone from the counter and pressed the stop button on the recording application. I saved the digital file, labeling it with the current date and time. I immediately duplicated the audio track and uploaded it to 3 separate secure cloud storage servers. I possessed the receipts. I held a flawless, high-fidelity recording of a corporate executive threatening to bankrupt a private citizen to steal a real estate asset. But as the adrenaline faded from my bloodstream, my analytical mind took over. I pulled my wooden chair up to the counter and sat down. Something about his performance did not align with typical corporate behavior. I thought about the sheer visceral panic in his eyes. I thought about the sweat ruining his expensive clothes. If a municipal zoning board blocks a commercial project, the development firm takes the financial loss. The corporate entity absorbs the delay. The executives might get reprimanded or lose their annual bonuses, but they do not drive to a gas station and suffer a nervous breakdown. They send their lawyers to negotiate. They do not kick metal cans and scream like mob enforcers over a land dispute. Harrison was not acting like a loyal employee trying to save his employer's investment. He was acting like a man whose personal survival depended on acquiring this specific piece of earth. He was acting like a man who owed a very dangerous debt. I opened my laptop and connected to the internet. I pulled up the State Corporate Commission Registry again. I stared at the name Apex Holdings Limited Liability Company. Harrison had demanded I sign the property over to Apex Holdings. He did not say sign it over to Vance Commercial. He specifically named the dummy corporation registered to his junior attorney. Why was a vice president so desperate to funnel the land into a third-party shell company instead of directly into his own firm's portfolio? I realized I had only scratched the surface of his deception. The fake job offer and the smear campaign were distractions. Harrison was hiding a much darker secret behind the corporate veil of Apex Holdings. And if I wanted to deliver the final lethal blow, I needed to follow the money. I needed to dissect the financial structure of his shell company and uncover exactly what he was planning to do with my land once he stole it. The sun began to set, casting long, deep shadows across the Virginia Valley. The family war was over. The corporate war was ending. I was about to enter a new battleground. I cracked my knuckles, positioned my fingers over the keyboard, and began diving into the darkest corners of my brother's financial history. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light remaining in the cramped back office. The crickets had started their nightly chorus outside, but I barely heard them. I was locked into the digital trail Harrison had left behind. For a decade, I tracked missing cargo containers through complex international shipping manifests, discovering how easy it was for companies to hide assets simply by adding a layer of bureaucracy. Harrison thought he was a financial genius. He thought setting up a single domestic limited liability company would mask his intentions. He severely underestimated the logistical expertise required to bury paper trails properly. I started with Gregory Finch, the junior attorney listed as the registered agent for Apex Holdings. A quick search of State Bar records confirmed Finch was a recent law school graduate working under Harrison's direct supervision at Vance Commercial. He was young, inexperienced, and entirely reliant on Harrison for his career advancement. Finch was a proxy, nothing more. I needed to see the underlying capital. Creating a shell company is easy, but funding it leaves a mark. Apex Holdings had offered me $420,000 in cash for the gas station. That money had to exist somewhere. I pulled up the county property tax records again, focusing not on my own land, but on Harrison's personal assets. I searched his primary residence, a sprawling, custom-built estate in a gated Richmond community. The public deed history revealed a massive secondary mortgage taken out exactly 3 months ago. Harrison had pulled $500,000 in equity out of his own home. He was using his personal residential equity to fund the cash offer from Apex Holdings. I leaned back in my chair, running my hands over my tired eyes. Why would a corporate vice president use his own personal home equity to buy a quarter-acre of land when his billion-dollar employer, Vance Commercial, could easily issue a corporate check for the acquisition? The pieces began shifting, forming a disturbing picture. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the civil court database. I ran a search on Harrison's full legal name, looking for recent filings. 2 hits appeared. Both were civil judgments filed by high-end private lenders. The first was a debt collection for a 6-figure luxury vehicle loan. The second was a default judgment from an offshore gambling syndicate operating out of a resort in the Caribbean. Harrison, the golden boy, the perfect son, the brilliant executive, was completely underwater. He was drowning in massive personal debt, maintaining a lifestyle of custom suits, expensive cars, and country club dues he could no longer afford. He was functionally bankrupt, relying on his 6-figure corporate salary just to service the interest on his loans. I returned to the organizational structure of Apex Holdings and cross-referenced it with the municipal permits filed for the Shenandoah Valley project. I looked closely at the projected budget for the utility infrastructure phase. Vance Commercial had allocated $3.5 million specifically for securing the necessary utility easements and highway access routes. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The air in the office suddenly felt thin. Harrison was running a classic real estate embezzlement scheme. His plan was brilliant in its ruthless simplicity. He knew his employer, Vance Commercial, needed my land to build their $400 million utopia. He also knew I was sitting on a multi-million-dollar choke point. But instead of negotiating a fair purchase on behalf of his employer, he decided to steal the profit for himself. He created Apex Holdings as a personal shadow entity. He used his home equity to fund the shell company, intending to bully and manipulate me into selling my gas station to Apex for $420,000. He thought he could use our mother and the threat of family exile to force me to sign the deed over cheaply. Once Apex Holdings owned the property, Harrison planned to turn around and sell the exact same parcel to his own employer, Vance Commercial, for the full $3.5 million allocated in their infrastructure budget. He would pocket the $3 million difference, using the massive unearned profit to quietly pay off his gambling debts and personal loans without anyone ever knowing. He was not just trying to steal from his sister, he was attempting to defraud his own chief executive officer. He was jeopardizing a $400 million commercial development to save his own skin. I sat frozen, staring at the screen. The sheer scale of his arrogance was staggering. He had constructed a house of cards relying entirely on my compliance. When I refused to sell to his shell company when I walked out of that Sunday dinner and publicly blocked his zoning permits, I did not just stall a corporate project. I inadvertently triggered his personal financial collapse. That was why he drove to my property and screamed like a madman. He was not protecting Vance Commercial. He was watching his last desperate lifeline evaporate. If he did not acquire my land through Apex Holdings, he could not flip it to his employer. If he could not flip it, he could not cover his gambling debts. And if those private lenders collected on his defaults, he would lose his home, his marriage, and his entire curated existence. I printed the property tax records, the secondary mortgage filings, the civil judgments, and the Apex Holdings corporate registration documents. The printer hummed and clicked, spitting out warm pages of undeniable evidence. I arranged the papers into a neat logical sequence. I placed them inside a standard manila folder and set it next to the brass plumb bob on my desk. I now held a comprehensive dossier proving gross misconduct, conflict of interest, and attempted corporate embezzlement. I possessed the audio recording of his unhinged threats. I owned the utility easement and the highway exit ramp. I had assembled the ultimate weapon. I packed my laptop into my bag and locked the front door of the gas station. I drove home through the quiet, dark streets of the Virginia suburbs, feeling a strange sense of calm. The anxiety that had plagued me for months was completely gone. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next attack. I was a tactician holding a royal flush. The next morning, my phone rang while I was drinking my coffee. The caller identification displayed a number from a prestigious Richmond country club. I answered. "Hello?" Serafina, it was, Caroline. Her voice was brittle, strained with an artificial urgency. "You need to come to the Oakmont Country Club at noon today. We have reserved a private dining room. Harrison has arranged a final settlement meeting with the legal team from Vance Commercial. If you do not show up, they are going to file a massive lawsuit against you personally. Please, Serafina, stop being so difficult and come sign the paperwork. We can put this all behind us." A final settlement meeting, a private dining room. It was the final trap. Harrison was making his last desperate play. He was bringing our mother to a high-stakes legal mediation, using her as emotional leverage to force my signature on a quitclaim deed. He was hoping the luxurious, intimidating environment of the country club would break my resolve. He still believed he could win. "I will be there at noon," I said. I hung up the phone. I did not feel fear. I felt a cold, sharp anticipation. Harrison thought he was inviting me to my own execution. He did not realize I was bringing the guillotine. I walked into my bedroom and pulled my sharpest navy blazer from the closet. It was time to introduce my brother to the consequences of underestimating a logistics analyst. I arrived at the Oakmont Country Club 10 minutes before noon. The architecture was designed to quietly assert dominance over anyone who crossed its threshold. Massive white pillars supported a sprawling portico, and the driveway was lined with imported European luxury sedans. A valet stepped forward to take the keys to my dusty pickup truck, his expression briefly faltering at the sight of the worn paint and cracked dashboard. I handed him the keys, smoothed the lapels of my navy blazer, and carried my plain leather bag up the wide stone steps. The interior smelled of old money, a distinct blend of polished mahogany, expensive cigars, and floral arrangements that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. The hostess directed me down a long, hushed corridor toward the private dining suites. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the Windsor room. The space was intimidating by design. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the meticulously manicured 18th hole. A long oval table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. Harrison sat at the far end, projecting the illusion of complete corporate authority. He wore a fresh, custom suit, his posture relaxed, his hands steepled in front of him. Next to him sat Gregory Finch, the young junior attorney, serving as the registered agent for the dummy corporation. But the detail that solidified the sheer toxicity of the ambush was the woman sitting to Harrison's right. Caroline, my mother, was present. She wore a pearl necklace and a rigid expression of maternal disappointment. Harrison had actually brought our mother to a commercial legal mediation. He had weaponized her presence to serve as his emotional enforcer, hoping her silent judgment would finally break my will. Serafina Harrison said, his voice, echoing with practiced magnanimity, "Thank you for being reasonable and agreeing to meet. Please take a seat." I walked the length of the room, the heels of my sensible boots sinking slightly into the plush carpet. I did not sit at the table. I remained standing near the opposite end, placing my leather bag on the polished wood surface. I looked at Caroline. "Why are you here, Mother?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly level. "This is a real estate negotiation between corporate entities. You do not hold equity in Vance Commercial or my property." Caroline sighed, a sound dripping with manufactured fatigue. I am here because you are destroying this family, Serafina. You have caused Harrison so much unnecessary stress. He is offering you a generous way out of this mess. I came to ensure you do the right thing for once in your life and sign the paperwork." She believed every word she was saying. She genuinely believed her golden boy was a benevolent savior extending a lifeline to a troubled sister. She had no idea she was serving as a prop in an embezzlement scheme. Harrison motioned to the junior attorney. Gregory Finch slid a thick stack of stapled legal documents across the expansive table. The papers came to rest inches from my bag. "That is a standard quitclaim deed and a global settlement agreement," Harrison explained, leaning forward. "Apex Holdings is prepared to offer you $420,000 via direct wire transfer by close of business today. In exchange, you immediately vacate the property and surrender all subterranean and transit easement rights. We will drop the quiet title lawsuit and waive our right to pursue you for legal fees." He offered a tight, condescending smile. "It is a very clean exit, Sarah. You double your money, and you get to walk away from a legal battle that will inevitably bankrupt you. Sign the signature line on page 14, and we can all go back to our lives." I looked down at the stack of papers. The sheer arrogance required to slide a fraudulent document across a table while maintaining direct eye contact was remarkable. He was trying to steal millions of dollars from his employer, and he wanted me to legally facilitate the theft. I slowly unzipped my leather bag. I reached inside and pulled out the thick manila folder I had assembled the night before. I set it down next to his fraudulent quitclaim deed. I addressed the audience directly. If you ever find yourself cornered by a narcissist who relies on intimidation to maintain their illusions, remember this rule. Do not argue with their fiction. Do not waste your energy trying to convince them they are wrong. You simply change the audience. When you catch a predator in a trap, you do not snap it shut immediately. You invite his boss to watch. I did not open my folder. I looked past Harrison toward the heavy double doors at the entrance of the Windsor room. "I believe we are missing a critical signature for a global settlement agreement," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. Harrison's brow furrowed. His confident facade slipped, revealing a brief flash of confusion. "What are you talking about? Gregory is the registered agent for Apex Holdings. His signature binds the purchasing entity." "Apex Holdings is a shell company," Harrison, I replied. "It holds no municipal permits for the Shenandoah Valley project. The entity actually developing the land behind my property is Vance Commercial. Therefore, any global settlement regarding transit routing or utility easements must be ratified by an executive officer authorized to bind Vance Commercial." Harrison let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "I am a vice president of acquisitions for Vance Commercial Sarah. I am an authorized executive officer. I can bind the firm. Now stop playing legal games and sign the document." I checked my watch. Right on schedule, the heavy brass handles of the double doors turned. The doors swung inward with a solid, heavy thud. A tall man with silver hair and a sharp, angular face stepped into the private dining suite. He wore a simple, tailored suit without a tie, radiating an aura of absolute, unquestionable authority. It was Richard Vance, the chief executive officer and founder of Vance Commercial Development. The air in the room instantly vanished. Harrison's face went completely slack. The color drained from his skin, leaving him a pale, sickly gray. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white as he stared at the man who controlled his entire career. Gregory Finch, the young attorney, physically shrank in his leather chair, his eyes wide with sudden terror. Caroline looked between Harrison and the newcomer, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion, unaware of the catastrophic shift in power that had just occurred. Richard Vance walked slowly toward the table, his hard gaze fixed entirely on my brother. "Harrison," the CEO said, his voice deep and resonant, echoing in the silent room, "I received a very troubling courier package at my private residence early this morning, a dossier containing some fascinating municipal records and financial disclosures. The sender suggested I attend this specific family mediation to witness a real estate transaction involving my firm's future. Harrison opened his mouth to speak, but his voice cracked. Richard, he stammered, his smooth corporate tone replaced by a desperate, reedy squeak. Richard, I can explain. This is a private family matter. My sister is having some financial difficulties, and I was simply trying to facilitate a quiet resolution to protect the firm's interests. A quiet resolution, the CEO repeated, stopping at the head of the table. To protect my interests. Richard Vance turned his gaze toward me. Ms. Griffin, I presume. Yes, sir, I replied, keeping my posture straight and my hands resting lightly on my manila folder. I appreciate you taking the time to attend. I would not miss it, the CEO said. Now, would someone please explain to me why my Vice President of Acquisitions is sitting in a country club attempting to purchase the only viable access route for my $400 million development project using a private limited liability company that is not registered to Vance Commercial? Harrison stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the carpet. Richard, please, he pleaded, holding his hands out in a placating gesture. It was a strategic maneuver. My sister holds a grudge against me. She refused to sell the land to Vance Commercial out of spite. I had to create a blind entity to acquire the property so we could secure the easements for the Shenandoah project. I was going to transfer the deed to the firm the moment she signed it. I was doing this for you. It was a brilliant, desperate lie. He was trying to spin his embezzlement scheme into an act of rogue corporate loyalty. He was hoping the CEO would prioritize acquiring the land over the ethical violations of the transaction. Caroline stood up, joining the defense. It is true, Mr. Vance, she said, her voice trembling with maternal panic. Serafina has been awful to him. Harrison has been working himself to exhaustion, trying to save your project from her vindictive behavior. You must believe him. The CEO looked at Caroline with mild distaste before returning his attention to me. Is that true, Ms. Griffin, he asked. Did your brother create this shell company as a noble sacrifice to bypass your personal vendetta against his employer? I looked at Harrison. The sheer terror in his eyes was palpable. He was silently begging me to remain quiet, to let his lie survive just long enough for the CEO to leave the room. He expected me to fall back into my old role, to absorb his fiction and protect the family image. I unclasped the metal fastener on my manila folder. I flipped the cover open, exposing the crisp printed documents stacked inside. No, sir, I said. My brother is lying to you. I slid the first document across the polished mahogany table directly toward Richard Vance. It was time to unleash the receipts and burn the golden boy to the ground. The heavy silence in the Windsor room was shattered by the sharp, crisp sound of the printed document sliding across the polished wood surface. The paper came to a halt directly in front of Richard Vance. Harrison lunged forward, his hand grasping wildly at the edge of the table. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "Richard, do not look at that. She is fabricating evidence. My sister is unstable. You cannot trust anything she shows you." The CEO ignored him. He picked up the document and adjusted his reading glasses. "That is the formal incorporation filing for Apex Holdings Limited Liability Company," I explained, keeping my voice steady and clinical. "As you can see, the registered agent is Gregory Finch, a junior attorney currently employed by your firm. However, if you look at the secondary funding disclosures, you will notice the initial capitalization for Apex Holdings was not drawn from a Vance Commercial corporate account." Richard Vance scanned the numbers, his jaw tightening. I slid the second document across the table. "That is a public record of a secondary residential mortgage taken out against my brother's personal estate exactly 3 months ago," I continued. "The amount of equity extracted matches the exact cash offer Apex Holdings presented to me for my property. My brother is using his own residential debt to fund this dummy corporation." The CEO looked up from the paper, his eyes locked onto Harrison. The temperature in the room plummeted. "Why would you use $500,000 of your own equity to purchase a commercial parcel?" Harrison, the CEO, asked, his voice dangerously soft. If the firm required this transit route, why did you not submit an acquisition request through standard corporate channels? Because she would not sell to us, Harrison stammered, pointing an accusing finger at me. I told you, Richard, she is vindictive. If she knew Vance Commercial was the buyer, she would have doubled the asking price. I was trying to save the firm capital. I was going to secure the deed through Apex and then quietly transfer it to the company portfolio. It was an unorthodox strategy, but it was necessary. It was a desperate final attempt to maintain the illusion of loyalty. But a logistics analyst never stops at the surface data. I reached into my folder and pulled out the lethal blow. I slid a third stack of papers toward the CEO. Those are civil court judgments filed against my brother over the last 6 months, I stated. He is currently in default on a 6-figure luxury vehicle loan, and he owes a substantial sum to a private offshore gambling syndicate. Caroline gasped a sharp intake of breath. She stepped back from her golden boy, her hands flying to her mouth. Gambling debts, she whispered, her carefully curated reality beginning to fracture. Harrison, what is she talking about? Harrison did not answer her. He was staring at the CEO, watching his career evaporate in real time. My brother did not create Apex Holdings to save Vance Commercial capital, I said, ensuring every word echoed clearly in the large room. He created it to steal from you. His plan was to bully me into selling my property to his shell company for a fraction of its value, using our mother as emotional leverage. Once he personally owned the deed, his intention was to turn around and sell the exact same parcel to Vance Commercial for the $3.5 million your firm allocated for infrastructure routing. He was going to pocket the $3 million profit to erase his gambling debts. He is attempting to defraud his own sister and his employer simultaneously. Richard Vance set the papers down. He took off his reading glasses and folded them slowly, deliberately. The methodical movement was terrifying. You attempted to embezzle $3 million from my infrastructure budget to cover a gambling addiction, the CEO said. You leveraged junior legal staff to create fraudulent entities, and you jeopardized a $400 million municipal development project by hiding a critical landlocked boundary dispute. Richard, please, Harrison begged, dropping into his leather chair, resting his face in his trembling hands. I was going to fix it. I was going to make sure the project succeeded. You have to understand the pressure I was under. The CEO turned his cold gaze toward the young attorney sitting paralyzed in the corner. Mr. Finch, pack your briefcase and leave this room immediately. You will be contacted by our corporate legal department regarding your ethical violations and potential disbarment. Gregory Finch scrambled out of his chair, grabbing his leather bag. He practically sprinted toward the double doors, fleeing the destruction, without looking back. Richard Vance turned his attention back to my brother. Harrison, your employment with Vance Commercial is terminated, effective immediately. My security team is currently clearing your office. You are barred from accessing any company networks or properties. Our general counsel will be filing civil fraud charges against you by the end of the week, and we will be cooperating fully with any subsequent criminal investigations regarding this attempted embezzlement. Harrison let out a low, agonizing sound that resembled a dying animal. The golden boy, the arrogant executive who had mocked my 10 years of sacrifice at the dining table, was completely broken. His custom suit could not hide the reality that he was a desperate, bankrupt fraud. Caroline stood frozen, staring at her son. Her perfectly manicured hands shook uncontrollably. The foundation of her entire worldview had just collapsed. The son she worshipped had used her as a pawn in a criminal conspiracy. The daughter she discarded had just dismantled a billionaire executive with a single folder of public records. The CEO picked up the fraudulent quitclaim deed Harrison had presented to me at the start of the meeting. He tore the thick document in half and dropped the pieces onto the mahogany table. Mr. Griffin, the CEO said, delivering the final verdict, I suggest you call a very good defense attorney. Now get out of my sight. Harrison did not argue. He did not yell or kick antique metal cans. The fight was entirely drained from his body. He pushed himself up from the table, his posture stooped and defeated. He walked slowly toward the exit, his expensive leather shoes dragging against the carpet. He did not look at our mother. He did not look at me. He opened the heavy double doors and disappeared down the quiet country club corridor. Caroline stood alone in the silence. She looked at me, her eyes wide, filled with a chaotic mixture of shock, regret, and profound embarrassment. "Serafina," she whispered, her voice fragile, stripped of its usual commanding edge. "I did not know. I swear to you, I had no idea he was doing this." I looked at the woman who had handed me the dry end piece of the roast, the woman who had told me my dreams were a tragic charity case. "I know, Mother," I replied, my voice devoid of anger or sympathy, "because you only ever saw what you wanted to see. You can go now." Caroline swallowed hard, a single tear escaping her carefully applied makeup. She turned and walked out of the Windsor room, leaving me alone with the Chief Executive Officer of Vance Commercial. The dramatic theater of the family war had officially concluded. The toxic illusion was shattered. But the corporate reality remained. Richard Vance pulled out one of the high-backed leather chairs and sat down at the table. He gestured for me to take the seat opposite him. "Well, Miss Griffin," the CEO said, leaning back, linking his fingers together, "you have successfully dismantled my vice president of acquisitions and exposed a massive vulnerability in my flagship development project. You proved my internal auditing team is incompetent, and you demonstrated a terrifying proficiency for logistical warfare." I remained standing, picking up my leather bag. "I appreciate the acknowledgement, Mr. Vance, but exposing my brother was a personal necessity. My primary objective remains the same as it was the day I purchased the property." The CEO nodded, a sharp, calculated smile appearing on his face. "You want to secure your future. You hold the unsevered utility routing rights for my entire valley. And thanks to your brilliant tax deed acquisition, you control the only viable highway transit route for my construction equipment. I am staring at a total ironclad monopoly. Yes, sir, I am." The CEO reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a silver pen. He set it on the polished mahogany surface between us. "I do not negotiate with terrorists, Ms. Griffin," he said, his tone shifting into pure business. "But I do respect a flawless strategic execution. Vance Commercial needs that land to save a $400 million investment. I am prepared to offer you $5 million right now for the outright purchase of your gas station and the adjacent tax parcel. We can draft the paperwork this afternoon, and you can walk away a very wealthy woman." $5 million. It was a staggering, astronomical sum. It was enough money to buy an estate in the wealthiest suburb, to travel the world, to never work another day in my life. The number hung in the air, heavy and tempting. It was the ultimate payout for my 10 years of sacrifice. But a logistics analyst understands the difference between a lump sum payout and long-term residual value. If I sold the land, I surrendered my leverage. I traded my independence for a single check. I looked at the silver pen resting on the table. I looked at the Fortune 500 CEO sitting across from me, waiting for me to eagerly accept his fortune. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I set it on the table next to his pen. "I am not selling, Mr. Vance," I said. The CEO's smile vanished, replaced by a look of genuine shock. "I am not interested in a lump sum buyout," I continued, pushing the paper toward him. "That is a commercial lease agreement drafted by my attorney, Marcus Thorne. I will retain full ownership of the property under Ironclad Holdings. I am prepared to lease the subterranean utility rights and the highway transit access route to Vance Commercial in perpetuity." Richard Vance picked up the document, his eyes scanning the terms. "The lease rate is $15,000 a month," I stated, my voice unwavering. "It includes an automatic annual escalation clause tied to the Consumer Price Index to account for inflation. You get your permits, you build your luxury utopia, and your investors remain happy. I remain the landlord of your primary access route for the rest of my life." The CEO stared at me. He calculated the math in his head, recognizing the brilliant audacity of the counteroffer. I was not asking for a payout. I was establishing a dynasty. "You are a very dangerous woman, Serafina Griffin," he said, a tone of deep, undeniable respect entering his voice. "I am just a logistics analyst, Mr. Vance. I fix supply chain anomalies. And right now, I am the only supply chain you have left." Richard Vance picked up the silver pen. He did not hesitate. He signed the bottom of the lease agreement, binding his billion-dollar firm to my terms in perpetuity. The war was over, the choke point was secured, and I was finally ready to turn the lights back on. The heavy glass doors of the Windsor room seemed to trap the suffocating tension inside the space. Harrison did not surrender immediately. A cornered predator will always try to bite its way out of a snare. He stared at the furious expression on the face of his chief executive officer, and his survival instinct overrode his panic. He adjusted his wrinkled suit jacket and forced a hollow, patronizing laugh into the tense air of the private dining suite. "Richard, you cannot be taking this seriously," Harrison said, his voice regaining a fraction of its former corporate polish. "My sister is a former data entry clerk. She does not understand complex real estate acquisitions. Those financial documents she showed you are entirely out of context. Apex Holdings was a preliminary legal vehicle approved by external counsel to shield our firm from her extortion attempts. The residential equity loan was a temporary bridge gap I secured to ensure Vance Commercial did not have to tie up liquid capital during the initial negotiation phase. I was acting as a dedicated fiduciary." He turned his gaze toward Caroline, seeking the familiar validation he had relied on his entire life. "Mother, tell him. Tell Richard how unstable Serafina has been. She has been harassing my wife. She has been making paranoid accusations. This entire folder is a fabricated revenge plot because she is jealous of my success." Caroline looked at the CEO, her maternal programming kicking in. "It is true, Mr. Vance," she pleaded, her hands clasped tightly together. "My daughter has always struggled with her emotions. She is lashing out. Harrison is a good man. He would never steal from you." The CEO looked at Harrison, then at me. His expression was unreadable, a mask of pure executive calculation. "Ms. Griffin forwarded me an interesting dossier earlier today," the CEO said, gesturing to the scattered papers on the mahogany table. "But your brother makes a compelling argument regarding the preliminary nature of corporate structuring. Financial documents can be interpreted in multiple ways, depending on the narrative provided." Harrison exhaled a sharp breath of relief. He thought he had found the loophole. He thought his silver tongue and our mother's enabling testimony had saved his career. He leaned back in his leather chair, the smug, arrogant smirk slowly returning to his face. I did not yell. I did not argue with his lies. I reached into my leather bag and pulled out my cellular phone. I unlocked the screen and navigated to the encrypted audio files I had saved to the cloud servers weeks ago. I placed the phone flat on the polished wood surface, right next to the crystal water pitcher. I pressed play. The pristine acoustic environment of the private country club suite amplified the recording perfectly. The digital audio hissed with the background noise of highway traffic before Harrison's voice exploded into the room. "You are nothing, Serafina. You have always been nothing. A mediocre bean counter sitting in a cubicled basement playing with spreadsheets while real people build the world." Harrison's physical body jerked as if he had been struck by an electric current. His eyes widened in sheer horror. The recorded voice continued, capturing the exact moment he kicked the vintage metal oil can. The loud, violent clatter echoed through the Windsor room, a jarring, ugly sound that violated the quiet luxury of the country club. "I will destroy you," the recorded version of Harrison screamed, the raw, unhinged fury, stripping away any illusion of corporate professionalism. "I will tie this property up in appellate court for the next 20 years. I will bleed your bank accounts until you are begging for spare change. I will take this land from you for pennies, and I will pave over it without giving you a second thought. You are going to sign the deed over to Apex Holdings tomorrow morning, or I will make sure you spend the rest of your pathetic life regretting the day you ever decided to challenge me." I pressed stop. The silence that followed was suffocating. The recording did not just prove his malice, it proved his intent. He had explicitly named Apex Holdings as the beneficiary of his extortion, not Vance Commercial. He had outlined a deliberate criminal conspiracy to steal a real estate asset through coercion. Richard Vance picked up his crystal water glass. His hand was trembling with suppressed rage. The ice cubes clinked sharply against the expensive glass, a bright, brittle sound that cut through the heavy tension. He set the glass down heavily, spilling a few drops of water onto the pristine tablecloth. "You were acting as a fiduciary," the CEO asked, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You call screaming like a deranged thug in a parking lot a standard acquisition strategy." Harrison opened his mouth, but his vocal cords refused to function. He looked at the phone on the table as if it were a venomous snake. I was not finished. The audio recording had destroyed his character, but I needed to destroy his leverage. I reached back into the manila folder. I had held the final piece of evidence in reserve, waiting for the exact moment his credibility evaporated. I pulled out the heavy watermarked tax deed I had secured from the county municipal office. I placed it on top of the yellowed 1970 easement document already resting on the table. I slid both pieces of paper directly into the center of the mahogany surface, ensuring the CEO had a clear, unobstructed view of the county seals. "I do not just own your subterranean utility access, Mr. Vance," I said, keeping my gaze locked on the CEO. "I used the capital from my classic car sale to purchase the priority tax lien on the adjacent 2-acre parcel. I own the physical land required for your commercial turning radius. I own your highway exit." Richard Vance stared at the two overlapping documents. The logistical trap was flawless. I had severed the plumbing, I had severed the water, and I had severed the asphalt. Vance Commercial could not move a single backhoe onto their 300-acre site without trespassing on my legal territory. Harrison's illusion shattered completely. The grand master plan he had spent months orchestrating lay in ruins. He was not the brilliant dealmaker. He was not the golden boy. He was a disgraced, desperate man who had gambled his entire existence on the assumption that his sister was weak. The CEO stood up. His imposing height cast a long shadow across the table. "Harrison Griffin, your employment is terminated effective immediately. You will not return to the office. You will not contact any of our clients. My general counsel is preparing a formal briefing for the district attorney regarding your extortion attempts and your scheme to defraud this firm. You should expect criminal embezzlement charges to be filed very soon." Harrison slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. He did not beg. He did not offer another excuse. The reality of his impending criminal prosecution crushed whatever fight remained in his body. Caroline sat frozen in her high-backed leather chair. The color had drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking pale and aged. She stared at her son, her chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. The pristine narrative she had cultivated for 34 years was gone. Her golden boy was a fraud, a criminal who had tried to steal from his own employer and extort his own sister. She looked across the table at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a chaotic mix of sorrow and profound realization. She finally saw the cold, calculated strength I had forged in the dark while she was busy praising my brother in the light. She opened her mouth, trying to form an apology, trying to bridge the chasm she had spent a lifetime digging. I did not give her the opportunity to speak. I gathered my documents, slipping them back into the manila folder. I picked up my phone and slid it into my pocket. I zipped my leather bag closed. The crisp, metallic sound of the zipper signaled the end of the tribunal. "You have my contact information, Mr. Vance," I said, offering the CEO a brief professional nod. "We can discuss the long-term lease parameters when you have secured a new vice president of acquisitions, one who understands the value of a dollar." I turned my back on the mahogany table, the crystal water pitchers, and the shattered remains of my family. I walked toward the heavy double doors, my boots sinking into the plush carpet. I did not look back. I stepped out of the Windsor room into the quiet, hushed corridor of the country club, leaving them to clean up the wreckage. The aftermath of a war is rarely cinematic. It does not feature sweeping orchestral music or dramatic, tearful apologies. Real victory is clean, quiet, and measurable. It is the solid, undeniable weight of a signed contract resting on a polished boardroom table. 2 weeks after the confrontation at the country club, I walked into the downtown headquarters of Vance Commercial. I was not there to defend my character or justify my existence. I was there to conduct business. Richard Vance sat across from me, treating me not as a subordinate or a nuisance, but as an equal partner in a high-stakes logistical negotiation. We did not discuss my brother. We discussed topography, infrastructure, routing, and transit access. The terms of the agreement were drawn up by my attorney, Marcus Thorne, and they were uncompromising. I did not sell the gas station. I did not surrender a single inch of the deed. Instead, I signed a commercial lease granting Vance Commercial the specific subterranean utility easement and the surface transit rights over the 2-acre highway exit parcel. The cost to their firm was $15,000 every single month. The lease was binding in perpetuity. Furthermore, Marcus had included an automatic annual escalation clause tied directly to the consumer price index, ensuring that inflation would never erode the purchasing power of my revenue stream. Richard Vance signed the final page with a gold fountain pen. He handed me the duplicate copy. The transaction was devoid of toxic gaslighting or emotional manipulation. It was a simple exchange of mutual leverage, resulting in a mutually beneficial outcome. Vance Commercial secured the necessary access to break ground on their $400 million luxury development. I secured a generational financial fortress. As for Harrison, his downfall was swift and unsparing. I did not have to lift another finger to ensure his ruin. The universe has a remarkable way of balancing the scales when a predator loses his primary shield. The internal investigation at Vance Commercial uncovered the full extent of his planned embezzlement. The corporate legal team handed their findings over to the district attorney. Harrison faced a barrage of civil fraud lawsuits that effectively froze whatever liquid capital he had left. The private, offshore lenders called in their gambling debts. The luxury auto financier repossessed his high-end sports car right out of his pristine driveway. Without his lucrative corporate salary to service his immense liabilities, his financial house of cards collapsed entirely. His custom-built estate in the gated Richmond community went into foreclosure. The golden boy, the arrogant executive who had laughed at my savings and mocked my work ethic, was forced to pack his remaining possessions into a rented moving truck. He fled the state of Virginia in disgrace, leaving behind a shattered reputation and a mountain of unpaid obligations. He became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered among the local commercial real estate brokers. The silence he left behind was the most peaceful sound I had ever experienced. But a narcissist never truly surrenders their delusion. When their reality shatters, they simply attempt to invent a new one. This predictable behavior arrived on a quiet Tuesday evening. I was sitting at my wooden spool desk reviewing a contractor bid for new asphalt when my cellular phone vibrated. The screen lit up, displaying a text message from Caroline. She had not reached out since the disaster in the Windsor Room. She did not send an apology for orchestrating the Sunday dinner ambush. She did not express a single ounce of regret for participating in an extortion scheme designed to steal my property. She simply typed a brief, casual message, acting as if the horrific betrayal had never occurred. The message read, "Thinking of you today, Serafina. I heard the news about your new lease. I always knew you had a good head for numbers. We should get lunch soon and catch up." I stared at the glowing digital text. A year ago, a message like that would have sent my heart racing. I would have agonized over the hidden subtext, trying to decipher if her praise was genuine or a setup for another insult. I would have drafted 10 different replies, trying to strike the perfect balance of polite compliance and cautious optimism. I would have desperately craved the maternal validation she was dangling, just out of reach. But sitting in my restored office, feeling the solid concrete floor beneath my boots, I felt nothing but profound indifference. I saw the text for exactly what it was. It was a pathetic attempt to rewrite history. She needed to align herself with the winner to convince herself that she had supported my success all along. She wanted to pretend she was the proud mother of a brilliant entrepreneur, erasing the memory of the woman who handed me the dry end piece of the roast. I did not type a furious reply outlining her staggering hypocrisy. I did not engage in a messy, emotional debate to demand the closure she was incapable of providing. Closure does not come from toxic people. Closure comes from the boundaries you build to keep them out. I pressed my thumb against the screen and deleted the message. I opened the contact settings menu and blocked her number. I did the same for my aunts, uncles, and every cousin who had participated in the smear campaign. The psychological chains were severed. The boundaries were set in concrete, reinforced by the truth I had fought so hard to protect. I closed my laptop and walked out the front door of the convenience store. The Virginia twilight was settling over the valley, the sky bruised into deep shades of violet and bruised orange. The air was cooling, bringing the fresh scent of pine needles and damp earth from the tree line. The gas station was no longer a rotting eyesore. The brick facade was painted a crisp, brilliant white. The rusted canopy had been stripped, sealed, and recoated in a smooth, matte black. The gravel lot was graded and leveled, waiting for a fresh pour of dark asphalt. It was a functioning, beautiful piece of commercial real estate. I walked to the edge of the property, standing near the tall steel pole that anchored the vintage 1970s highway sign. The tall structure had been dark for 4 decades, its internal wiring destroyed by weather and neglect. I had used a fraction of my first $15,000 lease payment to hire a specialized commercial electrician. He had spent 3 days replacing the transformers and custom bending new glass tubing to match the original retro design. I reached into the gray metal utility box mounted at the base of the pole. My fingers found the heavy industrial breaker switch. I took a slow, deep breath, tasting the clean evening air. Then I pushed the heavy switch upward. The connection engaged with a solid, satisfying funk. High-voltage electricity surged through the fresh copper wiring, climbing the height of the steel pole. A low, resonant hum began to vibrate through the metal. High above my head, the neon gas ignited. The sharp, rhythmic crackle of the current buzzing to life echoed in the quiet twilight. Vivid, brilliant tubes of bright pink and deep electric blue flared against the darkening sky, illuminating the entire lot in a warm neon glow. The colors bled into the shadows, pushing back the darkness, claiming the space with undeniable, vibrant authority. I stood under the humming light, looking out at the vast 300-acre valley that would soon become a luxury utopia. They could build their glass condominiums and their tree-lined boulevards, but every single person who entered that valley, every drop of water that flowed through those pipes, every piece of heavy machinery that rolled off the highway would pass through my territory. They called me a hopeless failure because I did not play their game. They thought my quiet nature was a weakness they could exploit. They assumed the logistics analyst sitting in the basement was not paying attention to the board. So I bought the board. If you are the quiet one in your family, the one they underestimate and mock, the one they expect to carry the burden while they claim the glory, do not let their loud, arrogant voices break your focus. Keep your head down, keep doing the math, keep securing your perimeter while they waste their energy on empty performances. Your truth is a quiet storm building in the dark. Keep grinding. Your receipts are coming. The mahogany dining table is supposed to be the beating heart of the traditional American family. It is the place where we are meant to gather after long days, carving out our piece of the world, where we pass down values, share our triumphs, and offer a safe harbor against the storms outside. But as we look back at the quiet, devastating war between Serafina Harrison and their mother Caroline, we are forced to confront a much darker reality. Sometimes the family table is not a harbor at all. Sometimes it is the exact place where a child learns that love is conditional and that justice is something they will have to build for themselves. When we examine the wreckage left behind in the Windsor room, we are not just looking at a corporate embezzlement scheme or a clever real estate monopoly. We are looking at the tragic, catastrophic culmination of a parenting failure that began decades earlier. Caroline did not ruin her son on the day he was fired by his chief executive officer. She ruined him slowly, over 34 years, by confusing protection with enabling and mistaking a curated public image for genuine family devotion. In American culture, we place a massive premium on success on the outward markers of stability and achievement. But within the walls of a home, when that pursuit of prestige eclipses honesty and emotional awareness, the foundation begins to rot. Caroline raised Harrison to be a golden child. She served him the prime cut of the roast, she smoothed over his mistakes, and she leveraged country club connections to ensure he never had to face the friction of the real world. She thought she was giving him a head start. In reality, she was robbing him of the most vital crucible a parent can offer, which is the opportunity to fail safely and learn accountability. By shielding Harrison from the natural consequences of his actions, Caroline engineered a fragile, arrogant adult. She built a man who believed the rules did not apply to him, a man who felt so entitled to his curated lifestyle that he was willing to defraud his employer and extort his own sister to maintain it. He lacked the internal emotional infrastructure to handle adversity because his mother had spent his entire life paving over his obstacles. The golden boy was entirely hollow inside. On the other side of the table sat Serafina. If Harrison was destroyed by unearned praise, Serafina was forged in the cold vacuum of emotional neglect. Caroline failed to see the quiet, brilliant daughter sitting right in front of her. She withheld validation, deeming Serafina's methodical nature and modest lifestyle as a failure, simply because it did not look like the flashy corporate success she valued. As parents, our primary responsibility is not to mold our children into trophies we can display to our neighbors. It is to recognize their unique, inherent worth and guide them with fairness. When a parent plays favorites when they designate one child as the savior and another as the scapegoat, they create a toxic ecosystem. They force the neglected child to build heavy iron armor just to survive the people who are supposed to be their ultimate protectors. Serafina developed incredible resilience, saving her money and meticulously charting her own future. But we must acknowledge the profound sorrow in her independence. A child should never have to become a ruthless tactician just to earn the basic respect of their own mother. The story of the Griffin family serves as a vital mirror for anyone raising children today. It asks us to examine the invisible currents of favoritism and pride running through our own households. Long-term guidance requires the courage to enforce boundaries, even when it is uncomfortable. It requires the emotional intelligence to look at a child who is struggling or acting out and hold them accountable, rather than covering up their mistakes to protect the family name. True family responsibility is rooted in the deep, unglamorous work of teaching integrity. It is about demonstrating that character is built in the dark when no one is watching, not in the bright lights of a country club dining room. If Caroline had possessed the emotional awareness to stop enabling her son, he might have faced a difficult, humbling lesson in his 20s instead of facing criminal prosecution in his 30s. If she had possessed the fairness to celebrate Serafina's quiet, steady work ethic, she might have enjoyed a lifelong relationship with a brilliant, successful daughter instead of being permanently blocked from her life. Caroline lost both of her children because she valued the performance of a perfect family over the messy, honest reality of a healthy one. Stories like this one remind us that justice is not always swift, but it is usually inevitable. If you find yourself relating to these themes of hidden family dynamics, quiet resilience, and the ultimate triumph of the underdog, you are not alone. There is a whole community of people who understand exactly what it means to rebuild your life after the people closest to you tried to tear it down. I invite you to subscribe to Luck Vengeance and join us. We share these narratives because recognizing the patterns in someone else's life often gives us the clarity we need to heal our own. Drop a comment and tell us your thoughts, and ensure you follow the channel for more stories where the truth finally gets the last word. We walk away from the story of the gas station and the mahogany table, carrying a heavy, lingering question. We spend our lives working, building homes and setting the table for the next generation. We pass the plates and pour the water. but we rarely stop to ask what invisible inheritance we are truly serving our children. Are we serving them the heavy burden of our own unfulfilled expectations? Are we feeding them illusions that will one day shatter and leave them starving in the real world? The lights go out in the dining room. The house grows quiet. And in that deep stillness, you have to look at the seats around your own table and wonder. When the time comes for your children to step out into the world and face the fire, will the lessons you've fed them be the armor that saves them, or the very thing that burns them to the ground?